I came home that evening like I always did, tired from a long day at work, but glad to be back. The house was quiet, except for the unmistakable sound of my wife's voice echoing from the living room. She was on the phone, and not just casually chatting either. She was practically yelling with excitement, her words spilling out so fast I could barely make sense of them. Curious, I stepped into the room and gave her a questioning look, but before I could say anything, she shot me a glare, not one of those leave me alone looks, but a sharp, almost angry expression. It stopped me in my tracks. I leaned against the doorway, waiting for her to finish. As soon as she noticed me, her tone shifted abruptly. She dropped her voice to a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. That was unusual. Normally, she didn't care if I overheard her conversations. This time, though, it was like she didn't want me knowing what she was saying. I crossed my arms and waited, but she seemed in no rush to hang up. I'm not one to pry, so I left her to it and went to the kitchen to grab a drink, but the whole thing didn't sit right with me. When she finally ended the call and walked into the kitchen, I decided to ask. "What was that all about?" I said, keeping my tone casual. Her response took me off guard. "I'm tired of this routine, that's what," she snapped. "Do you even realize how long it's been since we've gone anywhere or done anything fun?" Her sudden outburst left me staring at her for a moment. This wasn't the first time she'd brought up the monotony of our lives, but the venom in her voice was new. "Are you serious?" I shot back. "You don't even work. I'm the one who busts my ass every day to keep this house running. What do you expect? That I quit my job so we can go live it up? Because, newsflash, we wouldn't last a month without my paycheck." My words hit a nerve. She didn't say anything, just turned on her heel and stormed off to the bedroom, leaving me standing there. Hours passed in silence. I wasn't one to dwell on arguments, but I'd be lying if I said her reaction didn't bother me. Eventually, she came back out, her tone calmer but her words no less surprising. "I'm sorry," she said. "Maybe I overreacted. But listen, my friend invited me to this gathering. It's supposed to be really exclusive and, well, kind of secretive. Her relatives are organizing it, and it's all themed around the 1950s. Costumes, jazz, blues, you name it. Apparently, there will even be special guests. I'm not sure what else to expect, but it sounds exciting." She paused for a moment, then added, "I would invite you, but it's during the day, and you've got work. Don't worry, though, I'll tell you all about it. Maybe I'll even sneak something back from the buffet for you." That last comment made me laugh despite myself. "All right," I said, shaking my head. "Have fun, I guess." Later that night, as we got ready for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the whole thing was off. A secretive 1950s themed event? Special guests? Why all the mystery? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder, what kind of event was this, and why was it so hush-hush? The question lingered in my mind as I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my wife bustling around the bedroom. It was earlier than usual, and as I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes, I saw her standing in front of the mirror. She was dressed in a tight black dress that looked like it belonged on the red carpet. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled to perfection. It was such a stark contrast to her usual laid-back morning routine that I barely recognized her. Before I could say anything, she grabbed her bag, shot me a quick glance, and darted out of the house without a word. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, trying to process what just happened. She wasn't one to dress up like that without a reason, let alone rush out so early. Usually, any events she attended started much later in the day. I told myself it wasn't worth overthinking, not yet, at least. Work wasn't going to wait for me, so I got ready and headed out, still mulling over her unusual behavior. At the office, I brought it up casually with a couple of colleagues during lunch. One of them, a guy who'd been around the block more times than he cared to admit, gave me a knowing look. "You ever heard of those secret parties?" he said. I shook my head, and he went on to explain some wild story about an exclusive swinger event he'd attended years ago. According to him, the dress code was exactly the kind of thing my wife had been wearing that morning. "If I were you," he said, leaning in, "I'd think twice about what's really going on." The comment sat with me for the rest of the day. I wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but the secrecy, the early morning exit, and now this suggestion from a coworker, it all felt a bit too coincidental. Still, I told myself not to get carried away. Maybe it was just a regular outing with her friend, like she'd mentioned the night before. But the thought of what else it could be lingered in the back of my mind, gnawing at me. When work finally wrapped up, I drove home, half expecting some kind of explanation or at least a sign of normalcy. Instead, I walked into the house and found her sprawled out on the couch, clutching a half-empty bottle of what looked like expensive whiskey. She was completely out of it, her dress slightly rumpled, her makeup smudged. The sight of her like that stopped me in my tracks. My chest tightened, and a flood of thoughts raced through my head. I stood there for a minute, staring at her, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The alcohol, the state she was in, the silence, it all pointed to something I didn't want to acknowledge. My mind jumped to the worst possible conclusion: she had cheated on me. The idea was like a punch to the gut, but I wasn't about to start making accusations without proof. I needed answers, and the only place I knew to start was her phone. Carefully, I reached for it where it sat on the coffee table. Unlocking it, I braced myself for what I might find. Messages, photos, call logs, anything that could confirm or deny my growing suspicions. But to my surprise, there was nothing. No strange messages, no unusual contacts, no evidence of anything out of the ordinary. It was almost too clean, which only made me more uneasy. I set the phone down and turned my attention back to her. She was still out cold, the bottle now slipping from her hand. Whatever had happened, I wasn't going to get answers tonight. I gently took the bottle from her, set it aside, and lifted her into my arms. She stirred slightly but didn't wake as I carried her to the bedroom and laid her down. As I pulled the blanket over her, I resolved to get to the bottom of it in the morning. Tomorrow was a day off, and I wasn't going to let this go unanswered. For now, though, all I could do was wait and hope that whatever explanation she had would make sense of this whole mess. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the sound of my wife's voice. She stood by the bed, shaking my shoulder. Before I even fully opened my eyes, I was hit with a wave of irritation. Who wakes someone up like that after a night like the one she had? I sat up and looked at her, still groggy but already brimming with questions. But before I could say anything, my frustration boiled over. "Who were you with last night?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. She stared at me like I had just grown a second head. "Are you serious?" she said. "I was with you. I came home, and you put me to bed. Did you hit your head or something?" Her calm response only made me angrier. "You left early in the morning, dressed to the nines, and came back drunk with a bottle of whiskey," I shot back. "Don't play dumb with me. I know what happens at those kinds of events." Her face twisted in confusion and then annoyance. "What events? What are you even talking about?" she asked, crossing her arms. "You sound ridiculous. Who's been filling your head with this nonsense?" I wasn't about to back down. "One of my colleagues told me," I said. "He knows about these secret parties. I'm not blind, and I'm not stupid." She let out an exasperated sigh and rolled her eyes. "Your colleague is an idiot," she said flatly. "And so are you if you actually believe him." Before I could retort, she pulled out her phone. "You want proof?" "Fine," she said, her fingers flying over the screen. "My friend's about to send me the pictures from last night. Give it 10 minutes, and you'll see exactly what we were up to." Her confidence threw me off, but I stayed silent, watching as she texted her friend. She put the phone down and crossed her arms again, staring at me like she was daring me to say something else. Sure enough, a few minutes later, her phone buzzed. She opened the message and handed it to me. The screen was filled with photos and videos of her and her friend at what appeared to be a very upscale restaurant. The images showed nothing suspicious, just them smiling for the camera, surrounded by plates of gourmet food and glasses of wine. The videos captured a live jazz performance, complete with a full band and dim, atmospheric lighting. There was nothing incriminating about any of it. "See," she said, her tone sharp. "This is what I was doing. Eating, drinking, and listening to music. No secret parties, no swinging, none of that garbage your colleague fed you. Feel stupid yet?" I handed her phone back, my jaw clenched. She might have been telling the truth about the photos, but I wasn't ready to let it go just yet. "Fine," I said. "But what were you doing there, really? You don't even like jazz." She rolled her eyes again and sat down on the edge of the bed. "I told you," she said. "I went to support my friend. She's the one who got the invitation, not me. I barely talked to anyone there." Honestly, most of the night was her chatting with some older guy who turned out to be related to the people hosting the event. Her next words caught me off guard. "Actually, that guy mentioned something about a job for me," she said. "Apparently, he's looking for someone with my charisma. It sounds interesting, but I don't know much yet. He invited both of us to dinner next weekend to talk about it. I made it very clear I have a husband, and he said that's even better." I leaned back, trying to process everything she had just said. A job? With some older guy she barely knew? And now he wanted to meet us both? Something about it didn't sit right with me. As she got up to leave the room, I made a mental note. Whoever this guy was, I was going to figure him out. No way was I letting this slide without knowing exactly what he wanted with my wife. The days leading up to the weekend were more of the same. My wife was glued to her phone, chatting endlessly with her friend. Every time I tried to press her for details, she would just brush me off with a vague response or tell me I'd find out soon enough. Once, I even called her friend directly, hoping to get some clarity, but she laughed and said, "You'll see when you get there." It was maddening. Meanwhile, my wife spent her evenings trying on different outfits. Dresses, heels, accessories, our bedroom turned into her personal dressing room. She didn't share much with me about her plans, and I was left to watch the show with growing curiosity and irritation. Finally, the day arrived. We drove together to the restaurant, an upscale place with valet parking and chandeliers visible through the windows. As we stepped inside, I couldn't help but feel slightly out of place, even in my best suit. My wife, on the other hand, looked like she belonged there, her outfit perfectly chosen for the occasion. Across the room, her friend waved enthusiastically, guiding us to a table where an older man was already seated. He stood up as we approached, smiling warmly, and shook my hand firmly. "Good evening," he said. "Thank you for coming. I understand how this might look, especially to you," he added, addressing me directly. That piqued my interest immediately. What exactly was this meeting about, and why was he so quick to acknowledge my presence? I took a seat, keeping my guard up as the man continued. He introduced himself as the owner of a company that organizes auctions, but not the kind I had initially imagined. "Let me explain," he said. "Years ago, your wife's friend's parents helped me during a very difficult time in my life. Since then, I've considered her almost like a daughter. When I met your wife, I couldn't help but notice her presence. She has the perfect demeanor and appearance for what we do. Our auctions are elegant affairs, and having the right person to present the lots is crucial. Your wife, I believe, would be an excellent fit." His words were carefully chosen, and while they seemed complimentary, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. I glanced at my wife, who listened intently, her expression a mix of curiosity and intrigue. The man continued, "These aren't the fast-talking, high-pressure auctions you might be imagining. Everything is conducted at a relaxed pace, with a focus on style and sophistication. It's less about speed and more about creating an atmosphere. I assure you, it's straightforward work, and I personally guarantee her safety and well-being." The more he spoke, the more I found myself softening to the idea. It didn't sound as shady as I'd initially feared, though I still had questions. For now, I held my tongue and let the conversation unfold. My wife thanked him for the opportunity, and before long, the dinner wrapped up. As we were getting ready to leave, he added, "Your first day will be Monday. There's a special auction coming up, and I'd like you to be the one to handle it. Just remember, the items being auctioned are confidential, so discretion is key." My wife agreed without hesitation, promising to keep everything under wraps. On the drive home, she seemed excited, talking about how interesting the evening had been. "I'm really looking forward to seeing what this is all about," she said. "The secrecy makes it even more intriguing." Her enthusiasm was almost contagious, but I couldn't ignore the nagging thoughts in the back of my mind. "You'll tell me what's going on, right?" I asked. She hesitated for a moment before replying, "Of course, but only what I'm allowed to. I don't want to risk losing the job before I even start. Still, if there's anything I can share, I will." Her tone was reassuring, but it didn't do much to ease my concerns. As we pulled into the driveway, her last words lingered in my mind. "I'm so curious about this assignment," she said, practically glowing. "It sounds like it'll be something really special." I nodded, keeping my own thoughts to myself. Whatever this secretive auction entailed, I was going to find out, one way or another. The week started like any other, with my wife getting ready for her new job. As I drank my morning coffee, she mentioned that her friend would be picking her up. I didn't think much of it until I heard the unmistakable purr of an engine outside. When I glanced out the window, I was floored. Her friend pulled up in a sleek, black Mercedes that looked like it cost more than our house. My wife's jaw dropped too when she stepped outside. She turned back to wave at me, an expression of surprise still plastered on her face, before hopping into the car and driving off. The sight of that car lingered in my mind throughout the day. I knew her friend came from a well-off family, but this was next-level wealth. It made me wonder what kind of circles my wife was stepping into with this job. Still, I reminded myself not to jump to conclusions. She seemed genuinely excited about the work, and I had no reason yet to doubt her intentions. By the end of the week, she was glowing whenever she talked about her new role. "It's honestly so simple," she told me one evening. "I just present the items, announce the bids, and smile. That's it. Everyone's so professional and respectful. It's almost too easy." Her enthusiasm was infectious, though I couldn't help but prod a little. "Nobody's tried anything with you?" I asked, half joking. "Not a chance," she replied firmly. "Most of them are older, married, and honestly not even interested. Besides, I'm nothing special compared to their wives." Her answer put me at ease, at least for the moment. The routine seemed to settle in smoothly. Every morning, her friend arrived in that Mercedes to pick her up, and every evening, she returned home with stories about the day. Nothing out of the ordinary happened, which was both a relief and a source of mild curiosity. I'd expected more drama, given the secretive nature of the job, but it all seemed above board so far. Then, midway through dinner one evening, my phone buzzed. It was my boss, and the tone of the call immediately shifted my mood. "We've got a series of business trips coming up," he said, "and your presence is absolutely essential. These won't be back-to-back, but you'll be traveling on and off for the next few weeks." Before I could respond, he hung up, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. My wife noticed my expression right away. "What's wrong?" she asked, concern flashing across her face. I explained the situation, frustrated by the abruptness of it all. "So, I'll be gone for stretches of time, starting next Monday," I said, setting the phone down. "That's just how it is, apparently." She nodded, her face softening. "It's okay," she said. "We'll manage. Besides, some time apart might be good for us. We'll miss each other, and it'll make the time we do have together even better." Her calm response surprised me, but before I could dwell on it, she added something that piqued my curiosity. "Actually, it's probably for the best," she said with a sly smile. I've got something big coming up at work. It's a surprise, but trust me, it's going to blow your mind when I tell you about it. You won't believe it. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite myself. What kind of surprise? I asked. She shook her head, laughing. Nice try, but you'll have to wait. Just focus on your trips, and when you're back, I'll fill you in on everything. I promise it'll be worth the wait. Her words left me both curious and cautious. Whatever this big thing was, it seemed important to her, and I wasn't going to push her for answers before she was ready. Still, as the days ticked by and my departure loomed closer, I couldn't help but wonder what exactly she had gotten herself into. The week-long business trip dragged on, each day feeling longer than the last. I kept in touch with my wife during the evenings, but our conversations were frustratingly vague. She seemed cheerful enough, but when I brought up the secret event she had mentioned before I left, she shut it down immediately. I can't talk about it over the phone, she said, her voice carrying an edge of excitement. I'll tell you everything when you get back. That only made me more impatient. By the fourth day, I couldn't stop thinking about how strange this all felt. Between her cryptic hints and the secrecy surrounding her job, my life was beginning to feel like some kind of low-budget spy movie. I resolved to get to the bottom of it as soon as I got home. Whatever she was hiding, it was time for some straight answers. When I finally returned, she was already waiting for me at the door, smiling from ear to ear. Her excitement seemed genuine, which threw me off guard. I half expected her to be defensive or evasive, but instead, she ushered me inside like I was late for something important. Come on, she said. Let's get you settled. You won't believe what I have to tell you. Once we were in the kitchen, she made us coffee and sat across from me, her energy practically radiating across the table. All right, I said, cutting to the chase. What was this big event you couldn't talk about? She took a sip of her coffee, savoring the moment before launching into her story. It was a huge banquet, she began. The kind you only see in movies. The food, the music, the people, everything was over-the-top extravagant. And then came the highlight of the evening, they auctioned off a night with a famous actress. My jaw practically hit the floor. A night? I asked, narrowing my eyes. What exactly does that mean? She rolled her eyes, clearly expecting my reaction. Not like that, she said. It's just an evening, a dinner, conversation, maybe some photos. Nothing inappropriate. But people were bidding insane amounts of money for it. The final bid was in the millions. As I tried to wrap my head around the absurdity of it, she continued. And that's not even the craziest part, she said, her tone dropping into something more serious. Do you remember how I told you my friend's family is close with my boss? Well, apparently, years ago, he was involved in some pretty shady business. He got into serious trouble, and her family helped him out. That's why he's so loyal to them now. The revelation didn't sit well with me. And he's not worried about that coming back to bite him? I asked. She shrugged. Honestly, I think he's beyond caring. He's got so much money and influence now that it probably doesn't matter. People like him always seem to find a way to stay untouchable. Before I could respond, she leaned forward, her excitement returning. Speaking of events, she said, do you have a day off coming up? My friend invited us to dinner. It's a small gathering, but I've been looking forward to it for ages. The lifestyle, the atmosphere, it's all so different from what we're used to. I raised an eyebrow, still processing everything she'd told me. What exactly is this dinner about? I asked. She smiled mysteriously and shrugged. She didn't give me all the details, she admitted. But she made it clear you're invited too. It'll be interesting, I promise. On the weekend, we set off for the dinner, and I found myself surprisingly relaxed. With everything that had been going on, I'd almost forgotten about the mysterious secrecy surrounding the event. As we drove, I turned to my wife. So, what's with all the hush-hush? I asked. She glanced at me and smiled, as if she had been expecting the question. Look, she said, it's just how things work there. They sell rare cars, old paintings, and other expensive stuff. A lot of people don't want their purchases made public because it could spark controversy or gossip. That's why everything's so discreet. Her explanation made sense, but I couldn't help feeling there was more to it. When we arrived, the atmosphere was as grand as I expected. The building itself was a masterpiece, with towering pillars and gilded decor that screamed wealth. We were greeted warmly as soon as we stepped inside. My wife's friend waved us over, introducing us to a few key players in the room. Everything seemed normal at first, though the level of extravagance was slightly overwhelming. Later in the evening, an older man approached us with a younger guy by his side. The older man was polite and charming, introducing himself as the host. His son, however, was an entirely different story. The kid, and I do mean kid, had the kind of smug face you'd expect to see on someone who'd never been told no in his life. He carried himself like the world owed him everything, and his eyes immediately wandered where they shouldn't have, my wife's chest. I held my tongue for as long as I could, but by the third time I caught him staring, I had enough. "Eyes up here, buddy," I said sharply. The older man's smile faltered for a moment, but then he chuckled and gave his son a swift smack on the back of the head. "Where are your manners?" he said, clearly embarrassed. "This man is your guest. Show some respect." He turned to me, extending his hand. "I like your directness," he said. "It's refreshing." I shook his hand, nodding in appreciation. It wasn't every day someone backed me up like that. The son, however, wasn't done. He muttered something under his breath about meeting me again soon. It wasn't a threat, exactly, but it was odd enough to stick in my mind. I brushed it off for the moment and turned my attention back to the older man, who was now praising my wife. "She's a natural," he said. "Her work has brought in more money than I'd expected. You should be proud." I nodded, trying not to let my skepticism show. I was proud of her, sure, but I still had questions about this whole setup. As the evening progressed, the older man mentioned an upcoming auction, something much larger than the usual events. "You'll want to congratulate your wife," he said. "She's been instrumental in its planning. With her help, it's shaping up to be one of our most successful events yet." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "She's told me about your work trips. It's unfortunate you have to be away so often, but perhaps we can find a way to involve you in the future." The comment struck me as odd, but I just thanked him politely and moved on. Throughout the rest of the evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that the younger guy was still watching us. Sure enough, I spotted him in the corner, showing off photos of his new red Jaguar to a small group of people. He seemed to be soaking up their admiration, but his eyes would occasionally dart back to us. It was unsettling, but I decided not to make a scene. By the time we left, the night felt like a blur of luxury and strange encounters. On the drive home, my wife's mood was light, and she seemed genuinely pleased with how the evening had gone. I nodded along as she talked about the auction and her plans for the next week, but my mind kept circling back to one thing, the younger guy's parting words. "We'll meet again," he'd said. Was it a casual remark or something more? Either way, it left me uneasy. This dinner might have been our first introduction to that world, but something told me it wouldn't be our last. Back at home, I couldn't let the events of the previous evening slide. Over coffee, I turned to my wife and said, "You know that little punk? He spent the whole night ogling you, even after his father smacked him on the head. That's not sitting right with me." She raised an eyebrow but didn't seem too surprised. "Yeah, we've crossed paths a couple of times," she admitted. "But only because of my friend. Honestly, I thought you'd let it go. I kind of liked how you called him out, though. Shows you've got a spine." Her tone was light, but it didn't ease my irritation. Changing the subject, I mentioned my upcoming work trip. "This should be the last one for a while," I said. She sighed and nodded. "That's too bad," she replied. "I was hoping we'd get more time together. Especially since my big vacation is coming up soon." A lot of those people from the auction world are coming back into town for the season, and there's going to be a grand event. That's the secret one I told you about. Her excitement was clear, but all I could focus on was the timing. It felt like too much was happening while I'd be away. Once the trip started, the days felt routine at first. I stayed in touch with her, but our calls were brief and centered around mundane updates. Then, a message from my best friend, who also happens to be an attorney, disrupted the monotony. "Hey," he wrote. "Did you get a new car?" I frowned, confused. "No." "Why?" I replied. His next message made me sit up straight. "There's a bunch of luxury cars parked near your house. Among all the black ones, there's a bright red Jaguar that stands out. Just thought I'd check." That comment sent my thoughts racing. "Not mine," I texted back. "I'm out of town, so that's weird. I'll explain later, but can you swing by later and see if they're still there?" He agreed, promising to keep an eye on things. The red Jaguar was too specific a detail to ignore. I couldn't shake the image of that smug kid from the dinner party bragging about his flashy new car. As the day went on, I found myself unable to focus on work. The whole situation felt off. I texted my wife, casually asking if she'd noticed anything unusual at home, but her response was short and dismissive. "Everything's fine," she wrote. "Why do you ask?" That didn't do much to calm my nerves. Something was going on, and I hated being stuck hundreds of miles away, unable to figure it out. Later that evening, my friend followed up. "Cars are still there," he said. "Looks like some kind of meeting or party. Should I dig deeper?" I told him to hold off for now, but my gut was telling me to get home as soon as possible. Whatever was happening, it wasn't normal. The next morning, I made a decision. I called my boss, feigning illness. "I'm feeling awful," I said. "I've been sick all night, can barely keep anything down. I need to head back early." There was a pause on the line before he sighed. "All right," he said. "But I'll only be able to approve partial pay if you cut the trip short." I didn't care. "That's fine," I replied. "I just need to get home." As soon as the call ended, I packed my things and made arrangements to leave. I wasn't about to sit around any longer while strange cars parked outside my house and my wife brushed off every question. The sooner I got home, the sooner I'd get to the bottom of it. When I got home, it was late in the evening, and my friend had already texted me earlier to confirm that the cars were still parked outside my house. I decided to take a cautious approach. Leaving my car a few blocks away, I walked toward my home under the cover of darkness, staying out of sight. My heart pounded in my chest as I rounded the corner and approached the property. Something about this whole situation felt off, and I needed to see for myself what was going on. I circled around the house quietly, sticking to the shadows. As I approached one of the living room windows, I saw a scene that made my blood run cold. My wife stood at the center of the room, while several well-dressed individuals sat in chairs around her. Among them was the son of the older man from the dinner party. My wife was holding a marker and writing on a whiteboard, something to do with bids, it seemed. I pulled out my phone and began recording, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach as the scene unfolded. What happened next left me stunned. My wife, as if on cue, began removing her clothing piece by piece. The men in the room clapped and cheered as if this was all part of some sick show. I couldn't believe my eyes. She cheated on me with this guy. I kept the camera steady, capturing every detail while rage built up inside me. I had seen enough. Whatever excuses she might have had, this was beyond anything I could tolerate. After the guests had their fill, they began leaving one by one. Soon, only the son of the older man and my wife were left in the room. I realized this was my moment. Quietly, I made my way to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. Without hesitation, I grabbed the pistol I kept for emergencies from its hiding spot and stormed into the living room. The shock on their faces when they saw me was almost satisfying. I pointed the gun directly at the younger man. "You've got 5 seconds to explain yourself," I said, my voice calm but laced with fury. He immediately raised his hands, stammering. "Please," he said, his voice trembling. "I'll give you whatever you want. Just don't do anything crazy." My wife, meanwhile, screamed for me to put the gun down, pleading with tears in her eyes. I ignored her and kept my focus on him. "Empty your pockets," I ordered. He fumbled with his jacket and pulled out a wad of cash that could have paid off my mortgage twice over. I grabbed it and gestured for him to keep talking. "Wait," he said. "I've got something else." He carefully slipped his pants on and headed toward the door. For a moment, I thought he was going to make a run for it, but instead, he walked to his car. A minute later, he returned holding a luxury watch. "Take this," he said. "It's worth more than you can imagine. Just let me go." I took the watch and motioned for him to leave. "Get out," I said. "If I ever see your face again, you won't get off this easy." He bolted out the door without another word. My wife tried to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Not a word," I said. "I'll deal with you later." With the money and watch in hand, I left the house and drove to my parents' place. I needed time to think, away from her and all the chaos she'd brought into my life. I wasn't sure what my next move would be, but one thing was certain: I had a plan, and it would ensure that neither she nor anyone else involved in this mess would ever cross me again. When I returned home, I didn't waste any time. My wife was waiting, trying to act as though nothing had happened, but I wasn't interested in playing along. From now on, I told her firmly, this marriage happens on my terms. If you want to stay, you'll follow my rules. No questions, no negotiations. She looked startled but nodded, likely thinking I was just blowing off steam. She didn't realize I had already made up my mind. Later that evening, I called my best friend. "I need the number of a good divorce lawyer," I told him. He hesitated for a moment before giving it to me. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Completely," I replied. "But I don't want her to know yet. This needs to stay under wraps until I've got everything in place." He agreed, and I wasted no time contacting the lawyer and starting the process. For the next few weeks, I acted as though everything was fine. Meanwhile, I was working behind the scenes to secure my freedom. I gathered the necessary paperwork, set up meetings with the attorney, and prepared the evidence I had recorded. The video from that night was my trump card, and I knew exactly how I was going to use it. Once everything was ready, I released the footage anonymously to multiple media outlets. The fallout was immediate and explosive. The video went viral within hours, sparking outrage and widespread curiosity. Journalists dug into the people involved, and it wasn't long before the spotlight turned on the young man's father. With paparazzi now following his every move, skeletons from his past began surfacing: tax evasion, shady business deals, and more. His reputation crumbled overnight. As for my wife, the scandal hit her harder than I expected. Her employer didn't hesitate to cut ties, citing the negative attention as a liability. She was devastated, alternating between anger and desperation as she tried to figure out her next move. At first, she didn't suspect I had anything to do with it. But as days passed, I noticed her looking at me differently, as though she was starting to put the pieces together. One evening, she broke down completely, crying about how everything was falling apart. "I've lost my job," she sobbed. "I don't know what to do." Her tears didn't move me. Instead, I responded with a cold smile. "What a shame," I said. "Don't worry, though. I've got a surprise for you tomorrow. You're going to love it." She looked at me with a mixture of hope and confusion. "What kind of surprise?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "You'll see," I replied, keeping my tone light. Inside, though, I was already planning my next move. The divorce papers were ready, and tomorrow, I'd hand them to her along with a reality check she wouldn't forget. As I watched her retreat to the bedroom, I felt a strange sense of closure beginning to settle in. This wasn't just about ending the marriage, it was about reclaiming control of my life. Tomorrow would mark the start of something new, and I was more than ready for it. The call from the lawyer came early in the morning. "The divorce papers are finalized," he said. "You can hand them to her whenever you're ready." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and anticipation. This was the moment I had been waiting for. That evening, I walked into the house with a wrap box in hand, determined to see this through. When I presented the box to her, she looked at me with a confused smile. "What's this?" she asked, shaking it lightly. "Open it and see," I said, my expression giving nothing away. As soon as she lifted the lid and saw the documents inside, her face twisted in shock. "What is this?" she screamed. "You can't be serious. You're divorcing me? After everything we've been through?" Her anger quickly turned to hysteria. She threw the box across the room and began shouting, calling me every name under the sun. "You're a monster," she cried. "How could you do this to me?" I stayed calm, watching her meltdown with a sense of detachment. "Go sell yourself at those auctions you love so much," I said coldly. "I'm done." Without another word, I went to the bedroom, gathered her clothes, and tossed them out the window onto the front lawn. She stood frozen, her face a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Get out," I said firmly. "We're done here." She stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter in the chaos. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked up her phone and began scrolling through it, my suspicions growing with each passing moment. What I found confirmed every dark thought I'd had. Beyond the auctions, there were dozens of messages and photos documenting her affairs with wealthy businessmen. Some were tied to the auctions, while others were private rendezvous. It was worse than I imagined, a web of lies and betrayal stretching far beyond our home. Realizing the potential impact, I decided to leak the information anonymously. Just like with the video, I sent everything to multiple media outlets. The fallout was immediate. High-profile names were exposed, marriages were put under scrutiny, and the facade of respectability these men had built crumbled overnight. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about making sure they all felt the consequences of their actions. As the media storm raged on, I began to feel a strange sense of closure. My wife's life was in shambles. She had lost her job, her reputation, and now her marriage. Meanwhile, I started planning my next steps. The watch I had taken from the son of that older man was worth a fortune, and the cash from his jacket wasn't insignificant either. Together, it was enough to cover my legal fees and fund a fresh start. Sitting in the quiet of my now empty house, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the chaos, it was all behind me now, or at least that's what I told myself. With the divorce papers filed and the media frenzy taking care of the rest, I was finally free to move on. But as I glanced at the watch on the table and thought about the storm I'd unleashed, one thing was clear: this wasn't the end of the story. Not yet. The divorce was finalized without any complications. Since my wife hadn't worked a single day during our marriage and the house and assets were in my name, she walked away with nothing. Legally and financially, it was as clean a break as I could have hoped for. The scandal surrounding her involvement in the auctions and affairs had left her reputation in ruins, closing any potential doors she might have turned to for support. Her world, once so glamorous, was now completely inaccessible to her. With the settlement behind me, I decided to start fresh. The watch I'd taken from that smug kid turned out to be worth a small fortune, and the cash I'd recovered was more than enough to cover the legal fees. I put the house up for sale and used the proceeds to fund my move to a quieter city closer to my parents. It was a deliberate decision, a way to distance myself from the chaos and start rebuilding my life in a place that felt more grounded. The process of selling the house and relocating wasn't without its challenges, but it was a relief to leave behind the memories of everything that had happened there. I bought a modest but comfortable home in my new city, one that felt like it belonged to a different chapter of my life. The first night there, sitting in the quiet, I finally felt a sense of peace that had been missing for far too long. A few weeks after the move, my ex-wife called me. Her tone was desperate, pleading for another chance. "We can fix this," she said. "I've changed. I'll do anything to make it right." I listened silently, letting her words hang in the air before ending the call without responding. There was nothing left to say. Her apologies couldn't erase what she had done, and I had no interest in reopening old wounds. Instead, I focused on securing my future. The money I had left after the move wasn't going to last forever, so I decided to be smart about it. I reached out to an investment analyst, someone who could help me turn my remaining funds into a reliable source of passive income. It was a practical step, but one that felt empowering. For the first time in years, I was making decisions purely for myself, without the weight of someone else's betrayal hanging over me. The investments began to pay off slowly but steadily, giving me a financial cushion that allowed me to breathe easier. It wasn't about becoming wealthy, it was about stability and the freedom to live on my own terms. I started spending more time with my parents, reconnecting with old friends, and rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under years of stress and disappointment. As for the question that might be lingering in the minds of anyone following my story, why didn't I see it sooner? The answer is simple: I trusted her. That's what marriage is supposed to be, isn't it? A partnership built on trust. Looking back, there were signs, but I ignored them because I wanted to believe in what we had. It wasn't until the facade shattered completely that I could see things for what they were. Now, I live a quiet, stable life, far from the drama and deceit that once consumed me. Thanks to the investments and the careful planning I put into my new start, I don't have to worry about money or unexpected surprises. I've built a life that's entirely mine, free from the shadows of the past, and that's exactly how I intend to keep it.
Tuesday evenings were consistently busy, particularly on the second Tuesday of each month when I had my Kiwanis Club meeting from 6:30 onwards. May and I typically didn't get home until around 5 o'clock or 5:30. Since Kiwanis was a dinner gathering, I didn't have to worry about cooking, but May, my wife of 4 years, always had some last-minute tasks she needed me to handle before I could leave. The real challenge, however, was my own struggle. According to May, she was 3 months pregnant and dealing with wild hormones. Despite her pregnancy, she remained the captivating woman I had married. Now, with the radiant glow of impending motherhood, it was especially difficult for me to tear myself away from her, even for a brief evening. She was perfect to me, standing at 5'3", weighing 110 pounds, with light brown hair and stunning blue eyes. Her physical appearance complimented me, but I cherished her for much more than just her looks. She possessed a sharp wit and keen observational skills, though her beauty certainly didn't hurt. Regardless, I had to be out the door by 6:10 to make it to the meeting on time, which meant rushing through a shower, getting dressed, giving May a quick kiss, and then heading out. I usually didn't return home until after 11 o'clock, often closer to midnight. Tonight's meeting didn't seem like it would be any different. After a hurried shower, I threw on some slacks and a sports shirt, grabbed my briefcase, and made my way through the kitchen to the garage. Planting a kiss on the back of May's neck and giving her a reassuring squeeze to steady her, I reluctantly left her behind and headed out. It was tempting to skip the meeting, not just for May's sake, but also because I had a project underway in the garage. I had been installing a baby monitor for the nursery-to-be, estimating that it would take me about 30 minutes to finish and then proudly show off to my wife. She always appreciated my small accomplishments, and I didn't mind soaking in the praise, even if it was somewhat misplaced. After all, I was a guy, and a little ego-stroking from my woman didn't hurt. As I settled into the car, I activated the garage door opener and started the engine. While the car purred to life, I placed my briefcase on the seat beside me and double-checked that I had everything I needed: cell phone, calculator, notebook, all accounted for. Then, I reversed out of the garage and down the driveway, waving to May through the kitchen window as she washed dishes. She waved back as I reached the street. Before I could shift the car into gear or even close the garage door with the remote, my cell phone rang, halting all movement as I answered it. As I greeted the caller, I glanced up to wave to May one more time, but she had already disappeared from view. The voice on the other end conveyed that I was caught at a good time. The caller informed me that tonight's meeting was canceled. Our president, Patrick, along with Everett and Jules, had been called out of town. With the key officers absent, it was decided to cancel this month's gathering. There was nothing planned for tonight, unless I had something urgent. Needless to say, I was relieved to have the evening free. I simply reversed back into the garage, noticing that May's face hadn't reappeared in the kitchen window of our 3-bedroom home. She later admitted she hadn't left the kitchen, anticipating my return to surprise her later. If she had been anywhere else, she wouldn't have heard me drive back into the garage. After entering the garage, I finally closed the garage door and then sat in the car, taking a few minutes to relax. I decided to order pizza for dinner tonight instead of cooking myself, allowing me to focus on finishing the monitor. All aspects regarding the camera and the nursery were completed, except for some garage connections and final testing. The nursery's cosmetic adjustments were minor. The camera, mounted discreetly in a corner, had gone unnoticed by May for 10 days due to its small size. I'd attend to those tasks another time. May had mentioned casually how convenient a nursery monitor would be for checking on the baby while it napped, prompting me to wire the house accordingly. I also opted to install sound monitors in each room. The idea for the visual monitor in the baby's room came from seeing some equipment a friend was discarding. While the main controls were in our bedroom, I installed a secondary set in the garage, where I spent a fair amount of time working, complete with speakers and an old TV acting as the video monitor. This setup allowed for flexible monitoring of the nursery from anywhere in the house. As mentioned, the project was nearly complete, needing only a minor adjustment before I could surprise May and unwind for the night. I decided to try completing the work before relaxing in front of the TV or spending time with May. I stepped out of the car and began checking my work. After about 20 minutes, everything seemed to be functioning properly, so I began testing the sound feeds. Each could be controlled individually, or I could route them all to the 5 second-hand speakers above my workstation. Testing them one by one, starting with the living room, they all worked perfectly, with impressive sensitivity. I could even hear May showering in the master bedroom. I set them all to be live and feeding into the garage, then proceeded to make the final connections for the video monitor. I got somewhat lost in my wiring checks when I heard someone speaking through the living room speaker, sounding like May on the phone. Curious, I turned up the sound and found it to be perfectly clear. The $1.20 spent on the 5 speakers was indeed a bargain. May conveyed to Roger through the speaker that it would be appreciated if he could be there by 7 o'clock. My wife's voice affirmed, "It's on, lover." In response, Roger assured May, "Okay, love, I'll see you then. Don't you dare be late. We won't have near enough time as it is. And no, don't figure on getting a repeat." After a brief pause, May giggled and hung up the phone. What was that about? Who was Roger? The only Roger I knew was Roger Jenkins, Crystal's husband. Crystal was May's college roommate and still her best friend. Roger and I got along well. He was a fun guy. I guessed he and May were planning something for Crystal. Well, I'd find out soon enough. It was only 15 minutes until 7 o'clock. Abandoning speculation, I pressed the camera's on button in the baby's room and reclined with a satisfied smile. The monitor displayed the spare bedroom, where the camera focused on the queen-sized bed, surprisingly made up with turned-down sheets. It was the first time I'd seen May do this without expecting guests. Adjusting the video controls, I zoomed the camera in and out. At the widest zoom, everything in the bedroom was visible, except the corner where the camera was fixed near the ceiling. Leaving it at that setting, I critically examined the clear image, capturing the door, window, closet, and the well-framed bed. Content with my work, I started tidying my workbench. Pleased with the sound and picture system I had created, retrieving a beer from the old refrigerator, I relaxed in my $1.50 recliner, a garage edition my wife wouldn't allow in the house but fit perfectly in the garage. Almost finishing the beer, contemplating ordering pizza, and planning to surprise May, the front doorbell interrupted my thoughts. A moment later, May greeted the visitor and expressed her impatience. She invited Roger to come in, mentioning they had until 10:30 before it was over. May assured him that until then, she was his all the way. The shock didn't come from the words, but from the husky tone in my wife's voice, a sound I only heard in our bedroom or on our way there. It was her closeness, seductive voice. Choking on the last sip of beer, I sat up abruptly. The front door closed, and May's voice continued, informing Roger that judging by the bulge in his pants, she wasn't the only one who had a hard time. It looked really good. She asked him to come over and give her a real hello. Roger responded, and a few grunts and moans followed. Then May's voice again, directing him not to stay there and to come back to our room because she had it all set up for them. I felt sick to my stomach. It seemed like May was leading him back to our bedroom. Confused and unsure of what to do, my initial urge was to burst into the kitchen and eject Roger from the house. But what was the reality? I took a deep breath. It couldn't be what it sounded like. May and I were deeply in love, and I was certain she had been as faithful as I had been. While she teased me about admiring other women, I knew it was just harmless looking. I never felt the urge to stray, and we were compatible lovers. She always had everything she desired in our closeness moments. Multiple climaxes were her norm, and I made sure to satisfy her until she indicated otherwise. This had to be a misunderstanding on my part. She was my best friend, and we were expecting a baby together. Sitting in the worn-out lounger, I noticed movement on the baby's room monitor. The door opened, and May gently directed Roger into the room with the prepared bed. Maneuvering him to the other side, between the bed and the window, she swayed back to stand in front of the closed closet doors, looking across the bed at Roger and almost directly into the camera. May wore her worn-out Saturday-Sunday morning robe, reaching just mid-thigh. However, her hair was styled in a sophisticated bun atop her head, accentuating her slender throat with just the right amount of makeup. She resembled a princess, except for the ratty old worn-out robe on her feet. The high-heeled slippers I had gifted her for her birthday 2 months ago adorned her feet. Although she wore them that evening, and I had complimented how they enhanced her legs, I couldn't recall seeing them outside her clothes since. As soon as this thought hit me, I realized I hadn't spotted them out of her closet since then, and I felt like I was on the verge of tears. This couldn't be happening. Across the bed from one of my best friends, my wife stood tall and proud, making direct eye contact. Her hand slowly rose to the robe's throat, and with her left hand, she held it closed at the neckline. Using her right hand, she unsnapped each button, allowing the robe to billow out, teasing Roger with glimpses inside. Undoing all the buttons while continuing to hold the robe closed, she brought her right hand back to her throat. Using both hands, she slowly peeled the robe open, standing for a moment to let us admire the vision framed by the robe. Then she let her hands drop, shrugging her shoulders, allowing the robe to drop and puddle around her feet. She was wearing the lingerie I had given her on Valentine's Day, which she had modeled for me on that special day. Since then, I had not seen it. Still maintaining eye contact with Roger, she raised a hand and gestured for him to come to her. As he turned around the bed, I observed my former friend's stunned face. He stammered that he was expecting to be with May tonight, but she had made it really special for him. He expressed how beautiful she was, mentioning, "God, but you are beautiful." They both disrobed. Suddenly emerging from my day's depression, I knew I would need proof of the unfolding situation. After a moment of thought, I hastened into the now empty living room, working quietly and quickly. Obtaining a fresh SD card, I returned to the garage, connected it to the monitor, and switched everything back on. The monitor displayed Roger and my wife, and tears welled up as I watched them move to the bed, embracing tightly. They engaged in a closeness act that seemed to last forever, with Roger driving into her relentlessly. After about 15 minutes, she attempted to pull away. Staring at the distressing scene on the monitor, I stood up and began pacing. I knew that entering the house would lead to a violent outcome. I felt sick to my stomach and completely unable to decide what to do next. "Roger, unless you want Gary to walk in on us, you have to go now." She bent, picked up his clothes, and handed them to him, gathering the remains of the lingerie she had given him along with herself. Placing everything on the dresser, I watched as May threw on her old robe and stripped the sheets off the bed, not even waiting for Roger to finish dressing before bundling them up and taking them to the washer in the laundry room between the kitchen and garage. Upon her return to the living room, Roger was present, and with the boastful, melodious tone men often adopt, he greeted her. He expressed that it was great and suggested they talk about doing it again. She replied firmly, stating that she meant it when she said just the once and only because of their deal. Roger acknowledged her decision, adding that perhaps for old time's sake too. He expressed understanding, saying that it was just for once, but if she ever thought about how great it was, maybe they could try it again. I heard the sounds of another sloppy kiss before Roger's footsteps seemed to fade. As he went to the door, I could hear the impatience in my wife's voice and the little sounds she was making, but it didn't register at the time, nor did the exhalation she made when she finally followed him to the door. Literally sick to my stomach, I lay back in the ratty recliner, looking at the now empty bedroom showing on the monitor. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was 10:37. They had stayed to their time schedule very well. I heard Roger murmuring something at the door, and I clearly heard May reply that it was just the one time, and only because of their agreement so many years ago. She emphasized that I was her husband, her lover, and the man she wanted in her life. She expressed uncertainty about why they did it now, and mentioned that Crystal, despite being okay with this, was her best friend, and more important than an affair. She questioned Roger about Crystal's importance to him. I couldn't understand Roger's mumble, but I heard another kiss, and then the door shut quietly. Almost immediately, I heard the lock click home. If I hadn't been so filled with tears and despair, I think the exhaustion sounding in Roger's voice after his session with my wife would have been funny. At the moment, it certainly didn't seem funny at all. After the door shut, May reappeared in the spare bedroom. I couldn't seem to think of it as the baby's room anymore. She quickly went over the room carefully, making sure nothing was amiss. After the tryst, gathering up her clothes, she disappeared into the hall, and I soon heard her in our bedroom. I listened to her shower, and then she was out, and I heard the bed rustle. It sounded like my wife had gone to bed. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was almost 11 o'clock. I just sat and stared into space. I had no idea where my life and my wife were going from here. I only knew I was heartsick. Thoughts and ideas crowded through my head. In some, I thought of things that would excuse my wife for what she had done. In others, I answered the excuses, and yet others I asked myself what I had done to cause May to need another man. Sometime after midnight, I wearily arose and turned the electronics off. Entering the house through the garage door, I headed directly to the master bedroom. Passing the spare room where my wife had been with Roger, I glanced in. The room was just as I had last seen it Monday evening. The bed was stripped, and nothing seemed out of place. There was nothing to tell that anything had taken place. Groaning to myself, I entered my bedroom. Glancing at my sleeping wife, I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and did my business, stripping off my clothes and leaving them in the dirty clothes hamper before dropping them in. I glanced in, and the hamper was empty. No soiled lingerie there. When I climbed into bed, my wife rolled over and threw an arm over me. She sleepily asked how my night had been. After a moment's silence, I told her it had been very traumatic, but I would tell her about it later. Usually she snuggled up to me. Tonight, however, she just lay quietly, pulling her arm back and rolling over with her back to me. She seemed to fall back asleep immediately, though listening to her breathing, I thought she was still awake. I just rolled away from her, then stared into the darkness. I don't know how much I slept that night. I couldn't remember actually sleeping at all. When the alarm went off, I just lay there. I was certainly in no shape to go to work, telling May I think I had the flu. I stayed in bed until I heard her car leave for work. I got up and began carefully opening drawers, being sure not to displace anything as I searched May's dresser. In the bottom drawer, folded and stored in a paper bag and under some sweaters, was the lingerie Roger had enjoyed. I pulled them out, noting the lap of the ruined underwear was still damp. After calling in sick to my boss, I played back the tape I had recorded the previous night. Initially, I fast-forwarded through it, avoiding a rehash of the experience and ensuring the tape's quality. However, as time passed, I began to notice details I had overlooked initially. The morning was spent scrutinizing the video content, and I made 2 duplicates along with 2 phone calls. Upon returning home, I realized I hadn't eaten since the previous day's lunch. Missing dinner and feeling queasy about breakfast, I skipped meals. While May arrived at her usual time around 4:30, when she came in to kiss me, I turned away, prompting her to give me a peculiar look. Eventually, at 5:30, I decided to confront the issue head-on. There was no sense in delaying it further. only causing more distress for myself. I asked Gary if May could spare a few minutes to show her what I had been doing for the baby monitor we were discussing. Her response was to wait until after dinner because she was just about to put it on. I picked up my cell phone and inquired about her dinner preference. She suggested Chinese, and I promptly ordered it for delivery. Then, I brought her into the bedroom, demonstrating the controls on the console behind the door. I left the sound on, moving from room to room while communicating with her over the monitor. Although she couldn't respond, the smile on her face upon my return indicated that it was working better than planned. Turning on the video feature, I instructed her to wait and watch. I then stepped into the spare room and stood where she had been the previous night. I grimaced and mimicked a slow bump and grind before returning to our bedroom. She exclaimed, "Gary, that's perfect. When did you get this going?" I responded that I got it going this afternoon, actually, the previous night. She wore a puzzled smile, seemingly trying to recall when I had found time to set it up. I told her there was one more thing to show her and took her hand, leading her to the garage. I explained that since I spend a lot of time there, I thought it was a good idea to have a monitoring station to cover the baby when she has to go out. Then, I activated the system in the garage. Recalling something from the night before, I added, "One thing, let me show you how it works," and I inserted a USB drive into the TV. "Watch the bedroom and see what happens," I told her. Watching the monitor, we saw the same view as from our bedroom, the initial scene of an empty room, though now the bed was unmade. Then I used the remote to turn on the TV, and the picture immediately changed to show May on her knees before Roger. Glancing at her face, I saw the color drain from it, and she seemed to sway before catching her balance. She looked suddenly at me, and I just stared into her eyes and pushed fast forward, stopping in just a couple of seconds. Then I gestured for her to watch the screen again. When she looked back, she saw Roger grabbing at her underwear. Although there was no sound, we could see May say something to him. We both watched, and then heard the small scream she gave, which I now realized was pain. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw tears running down May's face, and also noticed the slight cringe when she saw again the rough way Roger had driven himself into her. Stopping the video, I asked if she wanted to see any more. My wife just looked helplessly at me. I requested May to come inside the house, feeling the need for a serious conversation and uncertainty about where things were headed. I guided her into the kitchen, where I seated her at the kitchen table and took a seat at the end of the table next to her. May mumbled through tears that she could explain, and I responded that I needed an explanation. I asked about the explanation, questioning May about a promise she made to Roger back in college. I wanted to know how many years ago she had promised herself to him. May began to explain, saying it wasn't like that. She and Roger had been dating while he had a reputation as a lady executor. May mentioned that she started rooming with Crystal, and Roger began dating both of them for a while. She elaborated on the dynamics between Crystal, Roger, and herself, mentioning that Roger and Crystal were heading toward a serious relationship. May recounted a conversation with Roger one night in her room, where they got more risque as they drank. In that conversation, she revealed to Roger that the only reason they hadn't been closeness was her fear of getting pregnant. May explained Roger's expectation for his partners to be on the pill and mentioned her reluctance to be too liberal with her favors. May continued her explanation, recalling that she and Roger argued, and she wrote a promissory note stating that if she could be sure he couldn't get her pregnant, she would spend an evening in bed with him. When she paused, I was staring incredulously at her. "How long ago was this?" I asked. "About 6 years," was her answer. May went on to tell me that the note was one of the jokes between Roger and her ever since then. We broke the news of her pregnancy to Roger and Crystal 2 weeks ago, and after the initial congratulations, Roger and I had gone into their garage to look at a problem he was having. Once I was out of the room, Crystal had looked her in the eye and told her the promissory note must now be due. May was shocked that Crystal even knew about it and stunned to discover that Crystal was taking it seriously. When Roger and I came back, I remembered a case of Dutch beer I had been going to bring to the cookout. Insisting it would only take a few minutes to get something special, I left the other 3 there and went home alone to pick up the beer. While I was gone, Crystal had raised the topic of the note again. May was surprised again to find that Roger had apparently believed the note was going to be honored. He was quite indignant to hear May was thinking of welshing on the agreement. This was all taking place after 3 hours of steady drinking, the last she would have until our baby finished breastfeeding. May found herself agreeing to honor the old note. Before I returned, it had been decided between the three of them that she would entertain Roger last night. I expressed to May that her story was one of the strangest I've ever heard, and it was challenging for me to accept. I asked her who the father of the baby she was carrying was. May shrank, and tears began falling down her cheeks again. My next question was about how many other notes were now outstanding and how many she had paid up on a date. May screamed at me, saying there were none, and pleading with me, "Gary, don't! I love you, Gary." She assured me that it was a singular instance and wouldn't recur. May pleaded with me to hear her out, acknowledging that trying to explain might sound absurd, but she felt obligated to do so. She emphasized that it wasn't planned or desired, and she had never been unfaithful to me. May pleaded with me to believe her. She dropped to her knees in tears, covering her face. I asked May if I could ask her some questions, and if she would be honest. She responded affirmatively, urging me to ask her. May emphasized that it was a one-time thing, and not something she wanted to do. She admitted that doing it seemed incredible to her now, but I was worth more to her than life. I gazed at her kneeling before me, my heart aching and my stomach in knots. This was my best friend, the person I wanted beside me for life, but I had to know if she was who I thought she was. I asked May if she could have said no to this. She replied that she could have, but she felt her honor was involved. May explained that she was afraid to tell me, fearing that I wouldn't understand. She expressed that she felt if I were in her place, I would do the same thing. She clarified that when the agreement was made, she was drunk, but when she was sober, she didn't throw it out. When it was made, she didn't know me, and it wasn't something she did to cheat on me. It was something she promised to a friend so dear at the time in that place, and she believed it was right. After pondering, I responded that she could have said no after sobering up, but felt it was right, an owed debt to the man her friend became over these years. I asked if that was correct, and she affirmed it. I asked her to think carefully if this was something she was looking forward to, and she replied with a shout that, after a while, she began thinking it wasn't real, just a joke. However, she realized it wasn't a joke. It was real. Staring into her eyes, I inquired about the past 2 weeks, whether she was looking forward to it. May took a deep breath and answered that she wasn't. She explained it was something she felt she had to do out of obligation, not pleasure. I continued to look at her, and May, looking down at the table, whispered that, "Okay, yes, Gary." She guessed she was looking forward to it, but not in the way I might be thinking. She clarified that she had never thought of cheating on me, never wanted to. However, all of a sudden, this situation was there. She felt she had to go through with it, and if she did, she saw no reason not to enjoy it. She stressed that she never felt it was something she had to do because I was not enough for her. It was something she had to honor, so she rationalized that she might as well make it special because nothing like it would ever happen again. Taking a shuddering breath, I let it out slowly. I brought up a memory about 6 weeks ago when I called May on my cell phone while driving back from a conference. We teased for a few minutes, and then I asked her to meet me at the Holiday Inn Atherton. I suggested making it a weekend away from home, maybe having some fun. I asked if she remembered, and she responded affirmatively, mentioning it was a great weekend with a tremulous smile. I then questioned if she wanted to make that a great weekend for us, for me. May expressed, "What a question! Of course I did," and it was. We had a great time, giving me a genuine smile this time. I followed up by asking if she recalled what she packed for that weekend. She mentioned taking a nice dress in case we wanted to go dancing, which we did, and some comfortable clothes to walk. I told her to wait a minute, explaining that I needed to turn the video on again to help her understand what this question was about. I turned and walked back to our bedroom, checking midway down the hall to ensure she was following me, and she was still there. I powered up the bedroom TV and pressed play on the remote. The scene unfolded with May still kneeling before Roger. She rose and turned to the bed, facing the camera in the corner, capturing her actions. I inquired about what she was wearing, and blushing, May replied that she had on her white lingerie, the set from Valentine's Day. She mentioned that I had never worn it for her, except when I modeled it after she gave it to me. May explained that there had been no place to wear it, and then paused, looking confused. I reminded her that she didn't wear it at the Holiday Inn. She changed into a peasant skirt and a white blouse. Later, she wore white cotton underwear and a bra, probably the same ones she had on now. I asked if she recalled what she wore to bed that night, and in a small voice, she replied that she wore her Donald Duck t-shirt. Looking into her eyes, I questioned May about the holiday weekend, stating that she mentioned it was special and the date with Roger wasn't yet. I pointed out that she wore one of the handsomer things she owned, something I bought for us to share with Roger, not for me. Inquired how special she thought she was, placing me. May slumped her shoulders and just looked at me. I continued, expressing that if I didn't love her, we wouldn't be living in this house together. I emphasized that if I didn't think she was something special to me, I wouldn't be married to her. I recounted an unexpected call that canceled my meeting the previous night, leading me into one of the worst nightmares I could conceive. Roger, one of my best friends, if not my very best friend, showed up when I should have been in my meeting. My woman May greeted him at the door and took him to a room she had gone to some trouble preparing for a tryst, giving him a strip. I observed that she dressed her body to display something she hadn't done for me in well over a year. When I questioned her about it, she claimed the meeting wasn't important to her, but she had gone to a lot of trouble dressing, putting up her hair, and applying makeup, things she hadn't done for me since Hector was a pup. This indicated to me that the meeting was crucial to her, considering it a treat she had to prepare for. It also suggested that her time with me was ordinary and of much lesser value. I saw her doing things for Roger that she only did for me on special occasions, if then, and doing some things for him that she had refused to do with and for me. Tears welled up in my wife's eyes, and she blinked them away. She insisted that it wasn't like that and expressed her love for me, emphasizing how much I meant to her. Seating myself on the bed, I gazed at her and stated that I wasn't sure yet what steps we could take. However, I mentioned that I planned to call Roger and Crystal, asking them to come over that evening. I questioned May about Crystal's awareness of the situation and then proceeded to dial their number. Crystal answered, and I requested their presence for a brief meeting that evening. While I was on the call, May handled the Chinese food delivery at the door. Despite having no appetite, I forced myself to eat, anticipating a lengthy and emotional night ahead. May idly toyed with her food, and for a moment, I almost believed her reassurances that it was a one-time occurrence and she still loved me. Around 7:15, the doorbell rang. Before opening the door, I told May that I suspected there was more to this situation than she realized. As I welcomed Roger and Crystal inside, both flashed smiles at me. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that each of them shared a subtle, knowing smile with May. Roger, especially, seemed possessive in his gaze toward my wife, and I noticed May cringe slightly upon encountering it as we all settled on the couch. I gestured for May to join them, pointing to the couch beside Crystal, but she opted for her recliner to the side. I rambled on about various topics, including the new monitoring system I had been developing. I refrained from disclosing its functionality or what it had revealed the previous night. Crystal and Roger appeared puzzled, questioning why they were summoned. Eventually, I broached the topic, jokingly offering drinks to lighten the mood. Everyone accepted, and I served each of them their preferred beverages. With Crystal's white wine, Roger's Jack Daniels and 7-Up, May's orange juice due to her pregnancy, and what looked like my gin and tonic but was pure tonic, I settled onto a hassock near the TV, needing to maintain some semblance of composure. Surveying everyone, I finally asked Crystal what her motivation was in setting up the situation. She appeared puzzled and inquired about what I meant. I clarified my question, asking why she had worked so hard to arrange everything. As I finished speaking, Roger sputtered and choked on his drink. Turning my gaze to him, I continued, acknowledging that I understood what he gained from it, but questioning if there was more to it. Attempting to focus on both women simultaneously, I switched my eyes back and forth. Addressing Roger, I expressed my concern about his reputation as a playboy, suggesting that one more conquest didn't seem worth the risk. He stumbled in his response, explaining that he was at home the previous night when Kiwanis was called off. He mentioned being in the garage during my appointment with May and when I arrived. To support his claim, he turned on the TV to show the live feed from the camera in the spare room, which I had just finished setting up before he came over. I remarked on the quality of the picture, pointing out the timing of its installation. May had her face buried in her hands, and Roger's face went pale. Crystal looked at me with a seductive smile. Continuing, I questioned the purpose of the whole situation. Crystal crossed her legs and her foot began bouncing up and down. She asked what I thought it meant. I replied, mentioning her reputation and Roger's, noting that despite them being straightforward with us, I had received some comments at the Kiwanis. I expressed relief that they hadn't said anything to us, but I anticipated that was about to change. Crystal confirmed that this wasn't the ideal way to bring it up, but agreed that it was time to address the matter. I glanced over at my puzzled wife, May. Up to now, I thought she was aware of this, but now I'm not so sure. May's friend and her husband, Roger, have been involved in a key club for the past couple of years. They meet on Friday nights at Barney's Broiler. A group of them gathers in a back room for dinner, where each couple brings a house key with their address on it. They drop the keys into a barrel, similar to the ones used in bingo games. After the dinner, the wives leave and go to their own homes to get ready for some closeness time with a partner other than their usual one. Meanwhile, the husbands draw a key. As per the rules, each guy gets to look at the address. If it's his own, he holds it in his left hand, pulls out another key, and drops his wife's key back into the barrel. Some guys might check out an address, and if it's with someone they recently had lovemaking with or don't like, they'll draw another key. However, they can only draw twice. If they pull their wife's key the second time, they're out of luck. The guys then have a drink before heading off for the weekend rendezvous. It's not just for a couple of hours or a night, it's the entire weekend. Crystal and Roger, being close to us, led others in the Key Club to believe we were involved in swapping with them on the side. Many other guys expressed interest in May, not just Roger. As I shared these details, the room fell silent, and I carefully observed each of my companions. May was gaping at me, clearly surprised and shocked. Crystal wore a simpering smile, her foot bouncing anxiously. Roger looked smug and somewhat relieved after hearing my description. Before we proceed any further, May, there's something you should know about your lover from last night. May's face paled once again as I recounted the situation, and it was evident she didn't want to be reminded of the delicate state of our marriage. I mentioned that Roger was well endowed, and her face turned completely red. She buried her face in her hands, stealing a glance at Roger, whose smug look remained, accompanied by one of the biggest grins I had ever seen. I felt the need to address the condescending look he had given me before the night was over. I shared my understanding that Roger was considered the prize at these drawings. All the wives anxiously awaited to see if they had drawn the highly regarded partner for the weekend, akin to the way it worked for college co-eds, as you described. Glancing at everyone's faces once more, I added that May had already experienced the best. Roger was smirking at me, and when I looked at Crystal, she was smirking at May, who seemed to be sinking into her chair, looking at me a little sickly. Leaning back on my hassock, I took a long drink of my tonic. Pretty bitter, but that's what my mouth tasted like anyway. Then I sat and let the silence build. Roger still looked very satisfied with himself, but it seemed to me that Crystal wanted to say something. I kept quiet, allowing the tension to build some more. Crystal began by explaining that their arrangement was a good deal, adding spice to marriages to keep the love alive. According to her, it prevented staleness and tiredness from setting in. She suggested that loosening up could bring a boost to our relationship, making us closer. Roger, in response, just grinned his usual grin. She continued, expressing the belief that it wouldn't affect our friendship and that it could introduce new ideas for the bedroom. Crystal assured us there was no pressure, urging us to think about it and stating that they would be there whenever we made up our minds. In response to this introduction and confession, I appreciated Crystal's patience, but made it clear that I hadn't discussed this with May and had no intention of doing so. I expressed disinterest in swapping or seeking another partner for lovemaking. I highlighted that May and I were intelligent, well-read, and imaginative individuals who didn't need unconventional methods to improve our bed life. I shared my hope for enjoying our life together for many more years. However, my tone changed as I addressed a more serious concern. I pointed out that Roger didn't practice safe lovemaking, and this troubled me. I emphasized that May, now pregnant with our child, would need to visit the doctor to check for STDs, creating a difficult situation for both of us. I explained that we couldn't engage in closeness activities until she was checked and proved negative to prevent any potential transmission between us. I made sure May understood the gravity of the situation. Looking at our former best friends, I expressed a sense of betrayal, uncertain about which of them had angered me more. Regardless, I conveyed that we would have to halt our gatherings for the foreseeable future. I powered off the TV, ejected the USB drive, and handed it to May. She crumpled several sheets of today's unopened newspaper, lit a match, and set them ablaze in the fireplace. After adding the drive to the pile, we stood together, watching the fire consume and burn until only black ash remained where the thumb drive had been. Turning around, I observed that both Roger and Crystal were now unconscious. I remarked that the chemical had worked before making a phone call to Lopez. 3 hours later, at 11 p.m., the doorbell rang. Welcoming Lopez, I pointed to the two limp bodies and confirmed that the package was ready. Lopez inquired if I had something for him, and I gestured toward the two individuals on the floor. Lopez went outside and returned with 7 more men. They picked up Crystal, and as they moved towards Roger, I asked them to halt. Retrieving a baseball bat from upstairs, I stated that I needed just a few swings. Lopez nodded, and Roger was placed on the ground. I explained my plan to target specific points, kneecaps, ankles, and the 2 sensitive areas, all done in a few swift moves. May stood there, mouth agape. I expressed a desire to hear screams, but acknowledged that he was unconscious. The group took him away, and Lopez returned to sit with me after 5 minutes, thanking me for the samples. I responded that it was my pleasure. May remained seated, her mouth still open after Lopez left. The night was cold, and May approached me, asking what would happen to our former friends. I responded in a cold, flat voice that they were going to Mexico to help some medical students practice. May questioned what would occur if someone looked for them, and I assured her that Lopez would handle it. I coldly mentioned that she eliminate them, expressing my indifference to her feelings. I argued that I had no right to be judged and emphasized that I had ensured their usefulness to society. May was visibly shaken. I informed her that my earlier promise about us returning and having a physical relationship was a lie. The next morning, we would conduct a DNA test for the unborn child, and if the results showed I was the father, I would assist with the birth. However, we would not remain married. She wouldn't take any lovers until our son was 10 years old, or I would ensure she became very useful. We would file for divorce in the evening, with her getting the house and my financial support until she found a job. May nodded, expressing surprise at discovering this side of me, and I walked away, stating that I didn't know it either. The following day we filed for divorce, and 3 weeks later we received the DNA report confirming I was the father. Months later, we finalized the divorce, and 2 months after that, my son was born. I spent a lot of time with him, maintaining occasional conversations with May. However, I could never love her again. She adhered to the agreement, refraining from taking any lovers, and I supported her financially for 5 years until our son could care for himself. I didn't date during this time, channeling all my energy into my son. Lopez expressed his gratitude with a significant thank you gift, and no one came looking for the 2 samples I had sent. What's that familiar saying? When life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? As I parked in front of the building containing our 1-bedroom apartment, shared with my wife Kelly, I pondered the state of our marriage. Was it transforming into a basket of spoiled lemons? Or was it just my imagination? Exiting the car, I retrieved the mail from our box. More bills, ads, and mostly addressed to occupant. I felt exhausted, a regular occurrence from working 16 hours a day, 4 days a week, not to mention the 1 day off from the nearby fast food place. The reason for my hectic schedule was simple. We had bills to pay, and we aimed to save for a future house. Additionally, I wanted to plan something special for Kelly on our approaching 5th anniversary. It's not like Kelly doesn't contribute. She manages the home and works at a travel agency, though the pay isn't exceptional. As for me, I dedicate 40 hours a week to a customer service job where I'm constantly on the phone addressing complaints or processing orders for our clients. It can become monotonous, but the pay is decent, and we enjoy a great benefits package. I earn $18 per hour, with monthly commission checks and a bonus every 6 months, based on the company's overall performance. Typically, my commission checks exceed my hourly wage. On top of that, I work part-time at the fast food place, handling orders and transactions. It may sound mundane, and at times it is, but it's a welcome break from my regular routine. I've been juggling both jobs for almost 2 years, and it's starting to wear on me. On the positive side, I've stabilized our finances and saved a substantial amount for a house down payment, bringing in over $7,000 a month before taxes. My plan is to eventually quit the second job once our financial situation allows. After our upcoming anniversary cruise, I intend to reassess our finances. Due to my schedule, Kelly has been handling the bills for the past year, and so far, she seems to have things under control. Through her job, Kelly secured tickets for a 5-day Caribbean cruise for us at a significant discount. Consequently, I indulged and upgraded to a suite with a balcony and a pleasant ocean view. I eagerly anticipated spending quality time alone with her on the open water. Both of us arranged to take vacation simultaneously, set to depart after work tomorrow, which happened to be Friday. I trudged up the stairs to our apartment and opened the door. The place was dark, and I couldn't hear anything except the clock on the wall. Strange, I thought. Kelly didn't mention not being home. Placing the mail on the table, I flipped the light switch. The place was clean and tidy as usual, but something felt amiss. "Kelly, I'm home," I called out, receiving no response. Entering the kitchen, I noticed nothing prepared. Typically, she leaves a covered plate in the refrigerator on days I return home late, but there was nothing. In the bedroom, the bed was made up, but Kelly was nowhere to be found. I pulled out my phone and attempted to call, but it went straight to voicemail. "Kelly, this is Sam," I said. "By the way, Sam Carmichael. Where are you? I'm at the apartment. Please call me." I hung up and sent a text, receiving no response. In the closet, I noticed several items missing from her side. Where could she have gone? I wondered. Did she leave me? Opening her dresser drawers, I noticed some of her things were gone. In the bathroom, most of her toiletries were missing. Then, I saw it. An envelope on the bathroom counter, addressed to me in her handwriting. Shaky, I grabbed the envelope and opened it. Moving to the living room, I sat down and read her letter. The letter began without the usual, "Dear Sam," just Sam. This didn't bode well. As I continued reading, it conveyed that she was aware this might be difficult for me to comprehend, and anticipated my anger. She expressed a desire to explain that she had been involved in an affair for the past several months, and was currently with the other person on the cruise we had planned for our anniversary. She mentioned our discussions about having children, but confessed that she didn't want to have children with me. She acknowledged my qualities as a hard worker and provider, stating that I would make a wonderful father to whatever children she had. She revealed that she had stopped taking contraception at her lover's request for the last 3 weeks to ensure he would be the one to get her pregnant. She apologized for the coldness of her words and assured me that her lover, Jake, was a good man in more ways than one. According to her, everyone at work was aware of their relationship and supported their decision to go away together. The letter continued, stating that her colleagues believed I would be an excellent father to the children Jake and she planned to have. She admitted to having fallen in love with Jake, but clarified that it was not the same love she felt for me as a husband. She likened her current feelings to the love between close friends or siblings. Despite this shift in emotions, she expressed that she did not desire a divorce and believed it would be best for us to remain married. This way, our combined insurances could cover her pregnancies, and I could raise Jake's children. The letter outlined changes for the future, including spending nights at Jake's place and him spending nights at our place. It suggested I find alternative accommodations on those nights, possibly by considering a third job to keep busy while they were together. She mentioned that love-making relations between us would no longer occur, as Jake insisted on exclusivity, and I no longer excited her. Acknowledging the potential for anger and contemplation of divorce, the letter warned of the legal consequences, assuring me that pursuing divorce would result in securing retirement benefits, half of my paycheck, and child support. Despite recognizing the pain, the letter conveyed that a part of her was hurting too. She and Jake decided to take the cruise using the tickets I had purchased, blocking my number to prevent calls or texts. They planned to share pictures and videos to show what I was missing and ensure her safety. The letter concluded by stating that I had to go as the taxi was waiting, and she was meeting Jake at the airport. They opted to leave a day early for a less tiring start to their cruise. She promised to contact me upon their return, and I could pick her up again. The letter expressed regret, but stated that this was the way things had to be from now on. It was signed, "Your friend, Kelly." I sat in shock as the letter slipped from my hand. Friend? What was that about? With a friend like Kelly who needed enemies? I pondered. Yes, things had seemed off these past months, but I thought it was due to my schedule. That's why I invested in that cruise. The more I mulled over that letter, the angrier I became. I yanked the ring off my finger and hurled it across the room. To hell with her and her ridiculous notions. If she believed I would sit here and accept this, she was out of her mind. I glanced at the clock, 3 a.m. With only 5 hours until my day job, I knew I'd get just a few hours of sleep. Contemplating sleeping in the bed, thoughts of her with this Jake guy flooded my mind. Opting for the couch, I grabbed a pillow and an Afghan and lay down, too exhausted to stay awake. I drifted off, only to wake the next day wondering why I was on the couch. Reality hit when I remembered the previous night. Checking my phone, I hoped for a message deeming it a joke, but sadly, that wasn't the case. Dragging myself to the bathroom, I showered, dressed, and hastily grabbed a cup of coffee for the road. Attempting to set aside personal problems at work proved challenging, especially listening to others complain about perceived issues. Though I did my best, colleagues noticed my distracted state. After lunch, my supervisor, Wanda, called me into her office, a signal that there was an issue. She expressed genuine concern, motioning for me to close the door. Wanda inquired about my well-being, asking if everything was okay at home, and suggesting that I consider quitting the fast food job since I was already working 2 jobs. After a moment of consideration, I decided to open up about my situation. I confessed to Wanda that everything was not okay at home. Trusting her previous openness, I felt she deserved to know the details. She asked me to share, and in response, I retrieved the letter Kelly left and handed it over. Wanda read the letter, and when she finished, she returned it, shaking her head. She empathetically stated that we needed me to have my head completely in the game at work. She mentioned hearing from some colleagues who informed her about my short-tempered and snippy behavior that morning. After reading the letter, she expressed understanding of the challenges I was facing. Realizing I had vacation scheduled for the next week, she suggested I take the rest of the day off with comp time. Additionally, she offered to refer me to someone and wrote down the name and number of the attorney she used in her divorce. Handing me the information, she mentioned that she had been in a similar situation and encouraged me to give the attorney a call, informing her that Wanda recommended her. Grateful for the advice, I expressed my thanks, and she encouraged me to take the next week to sort things out and return with a clear mind. She added a light-hearted comment, saying, "And remember, there's lots of fish out there," to which I acknowledged, "I hear you, Wanda." I thanked her again, and then I shut down my desk, informing my cube mate that I would be back in a week or so. He waved as I left. Upon reaching my car, I retrieved the note Wanda provided and dialed the number. The receptionist at the law offices of Hawkins and Bledsoe answered, inquiring about the purpose of my call. I requested to speak with Linda Hawkins, mentioning that Wanda Green had recommended her to me. The receptionist placed me on hold and returned after a couple of minutes, informing me that Miss Hawkins was scheduled to be in court that afternoon, but had an open slot at 4 p.m. She asked if that would work for me, and I confirmed that it would be perfect. I inquired about the office location, and after jotting down the address, I thanked the receptionist and ended the call. Checking the time, I realized I had enough time to visit the travel agency where Kelly worked. I hoped to intervene and, if possible, seek a refund for our plans. Upon reaching the agency, parking the car and entering, the 4 other women in the main office glanced up, their expressions hinting at their awareness of the situation. I approached the front desk where Julie, the receptionist, sat. She greeted me, and I stated my intention to see Kelly. Glancing around, Julie informed me that Kelly wasn't present that day. She handed me a large envelope, explaining that Kelly had informed them that I knew and asked her to give me the envelope if I came in. The other women wore smirks, leaving me uncertain about how much they knew. Upon opening the envelope, I was hit by the mixture of Kelly's scent, urine, and an unfamiliar odor. Inside, I found a pair of her soaking wet underwear folded up. Repulsed, I used a pencil to inspect further and discovered her rings covered in a white, gooey substance, unmistakably Jake's seed fluid. At the bottom of the envelope, there was also a USB drive. Disgusted, I confronted Julie, who smirked. As I looked around, I noticed the other women doing the same. I asked if they found it funny, and Julie, embarrassed, looked away. She explained that the thumb drive contained pictures and videos from a bon voyage party they had organized for Kelly and Jake the previous afternoon, with Kelly suggesting that I would enjoy them. An older woman emerged from the back and leaned against the front office wall, observing me. She informed me that Kelly and Jake had already left and that everyone at the agency was aware of their relationship. When I asked if they approved of it, she shrugged and asked what I wanted. I stated my desire for a refund, explaining that I had paid for the cruise and wanted my money back since I didn't have the tickets. She replied that the tickets were non-refundable and mentioned that it was nice of me to let Kelly put one in Jake's name. I disputed that claim, asserting that what Kelly did was fraudulent and insisted on getting my money back. However, she refused, saying it wouldn't happen. In frustration, I declared that I would take legal action, suing the agency and everyone involved. As I turned to leave, Julie stopped me, apologizing for the situation and explaining that Kelly had led them to believe I approved of her actions. She urged me to let Kelly have the cruise, emphasizing that there would be other opportunities. Curious about Julie's relationship status, I asked if she was married, and she responded negatively. I then expressed the pain of being betrayed by someone claiming to love me, and warned her of the potential future pain she might experience. I emphasized my disdain for Kelly and left with a harsh message for Julie to relay. I told Julie to inform Kelly that I hated her and never wanted to see her again. I added a shocking statement, expressing the hope that she rots and dies of AIDS. Julie and the others appeared shocked, and I concluded by announcing my intention to see them all in court before leaving before anyone could respond. With a couple of hours before my appointment at Linda's office, I parked in a shady spot at a park and took a nap in my car after setting my phone's clock. Reflecting on the lack of justice in the world, I asked myself, is there no justice in the world? The nap provided some relief, but my neck felt stiff and sore when I sat up in the driver's seat. After sipping lukewarm coffee, I started the car. Upon reaching the building housing Linda's office, I checked my appearance in the mirror. I looked worn out. Attempting to tidy my hair, I grabbed Kelly's letter and the envelope from Julie before heading inside. In the office, a pleasant blonde receptionist took my name and directed me to a seat. She offered a cup of fresh coffee, which I gratefully accepted. A few minutes later, she led me to Linda's office and closed the door behind me. Linda Hawkins, older than me but still quite attractive, stood up and extended her hand, which I accepted. She greeted me, expressing pleasure in meeting me, and suggested I have a seat. I thanked her and took a seat, responding that she could call me Sam. She acknowledged with a slight smile and encouraged me to address her as Linda, asking about the purpose of my visit. I informed her that I wanted to explore the possibility of getting a divorce. Linda questioned my reason, and I explained that my wife was cheating on me. To emphasize the gravity of the situation, I handed her the letter Kelly had left for me. Linda read the letter, frowning as she did so, and then handed it back to me. Inquiring about the envelope, I passed it to her, cautioning her about its contents. She opened it, reacting with a contorted face due to the unpleasant odor. After closing it back up, she handed it to me and expressed understanding, stating that she didn't blame me for wanting a divorce. She asked about my goals in the divorce, to which I asserted that I wanted essentially everything. I revealed a desire for her to face consequences for her actions, noting not only the infidelity, but also the agency's involvement in defrauding me of more than $2,000. She acknowledged my lack of knowledge about divorce laws and mentioned that the family court system in the state prioritizes economics over justice. Linda, expressing gratitude for the recommendation, explained that having no children was advantageous in divorce proceedings, as divorce is often hardest on children. When I mentioned that we were renting a one-bedroom apartment and working extra to save for a down payment on a house, Linda noted that it was one less thing to deal with. She inquired about my wife's employment at AA Travel Agency, asking about her income. I disclosed that she earned about the same as my base pay, approximately $800 an hour. Linda explained that the court might order me to provide support for a couple of years unless she remarried, and we would likely have to split all assets, including any retirement plans. Regarding her infidelity, Linda clarified that it couldn't be mentioned in the papers due to the state being a no-fault state. However, it might be used in negotiations. When asked about counseling, I expressed that I had not considered it, as there was no way to move past the situation. Linda mentioned that the court might still order counseling, and I inquired about the threat of my wife bringing her lover into the apartment. Linda inquired about my wife's ability to bring people into the apartment, asking if her name was on the lease, and I confirmed that it was. She explained that unless there were threats of damage, there was nothing I could do to prevent her from inviting people into the apartment, as she lived there as well. I expressed frustration at the situation, and Linda acknowledged that divorce is challenging, describing it as something one gets. I chuckled at her comment. Linda suggested that my wife might have a change of heart upon her return and reconsider the marriage. She proposed the idea of a legal separation to allow for a cooling down period, and if I still wanted a divorce after that, we could proceed. Linda also advised me to consider quitting the second job, as earning more money could lead to increased financial demands. She noted that I seemed to have been overextending myself for a while. Expressing my frustration, I asked about getting a refund for the cruise. Linda assured me that we could explore options to address that issue. We discussed the particulars, and Linda made notes as we talked. When we finished, she handed me a checklist of things to do, most of it dealing with the bank. I shook her hand and left, stopping at the front desk to leave a retainer on my way out. I still felt like crap about the whole situation, but at least I was doing something about it. I considered quitting the second job. It was wearing me out anyway, so I decided to go in and talk to the manager tomorrow and give my notice. On the way home, I stopped at the bank and made the changes Linda suggested. I paid off the joint credit card Kelly had and canceled it. Then I emptied out half of all our joint accounts and put it into the separate account I had already set up for the bonuses and commissions. Kelly didn't have access to that account anyway, so I figured it would be safe. I had planned to use that money for a house, but those plans were out the window. I got home, grabbed the mail out of the mailbox, then ate some leftover meatloaf Kelly had made a few days earlier. She had a habit of cooking large dishes, then freezing what we didn't eat for later. It took a while to thaw, but that was okay by me. I sat down with my dinner and looked through the mail, mostly junk, crap, and advertised fluids addressed to occupant or resident, except for one piece that looked like a handwritten invitation with detailed calligraphy addressed to me personally from something called Ramnusha Gallery. I never heard of it and nearly tossed it as well, but I felt compelled to open it. What I found was an invitation to a private art showing. I wasn't sure if this was something Kelly signed me up for or not. She had always tried to get me interested in the arts, but I frankly just didn't have much time with my work schedule. The invitation said I should be there at 9:30 a.m., sharp. As I looked at the invitation, I felt as though this was something I needed to do. Don't ask me to explain it. I put the invitation on the refrigerator door with a magnet and decided to go. If nothing else, it might take my mind off my problems for a bit. I wore a pair of latex gloves and opened the envelope provided by Julie earlier. Overcoming the unpleasant smell emanating from its contents, I retrieved the underwear, noticing the ring resting in the wettest section. Placing them in a plastic sandwich bag, I sealed it tightly. I wiped down the USB drive with drinks, uncertain if it would make a difference, but opting for caution given the enclosed items. Setting up my laptop, I inserted the drive, anticipating I might not appreciate its contents, and my intuition proved correct. The folder contained pictures featuring Kelly alongside a man, presumably Jake, enjoying drinks and socializing with office friends. Jake's hands were prominently on her in the photos, and the other girls wore smiles. More images depicted Jake's closeness, while other girls, even their supervisor, watched. The penultimate picture showed Kelly over a toilet bowl, undressed, with two girls holding her underwear, one of them being Julie. In the underwear midst were her rings, the ones I had placed on her finger almost 5 years ago. Examining the photos, I could discern a stream of urine soaking the undergarment and the gold rings. The final picture portrayed Kelly still undressed over the toilet, underwear and rings underneath her, smiling into the camera as she waved. The others joined in, smiling and waving with her. I had never felt so humiliated in my life. Soon after, a surge of something else overwhelmed me: hatred. At that moment, I despised her with every fiber of my being. Exiting that folder, I explored another containing several video files. Reluctantly previewing them, I was more focused on hearing what she and the others had to say rather than witnessing her with this individual. I reached the last video, curious about the reason behind her actions of urinating on her rings. Starting the video, I observed her adjusting herself over the bowl as others brought in the underwear. Kelly removed her rings as Julie and another girl extended her underwear beneath. They handed her rings to the older woman, who carefully placed them on the garment to prevent them from falling into the toilet. Jake inquired if she was ready, and Kelly, expressing a need to use the bathroom, looked directly into the camera, stating her intentions and expressing her feelings towards our marriage. She instructed one of the girls to bring in the envelope, emphasizing the inclusion of photos and videos. Kelly directed Julie to ensure that I receive the envelope if I come by the next day. Julie agreed to do so, and Kelly bid me farewell, waving along with the others. After the waves, Jake turned to the camera, assuring that he would take care of Kelly in my absence, and making a derogatory comment about me paying for everything. The video concluded, leaving me with a nauseating feeling. Wasn't typically a violent man, but at that moment, I wanted to eliminate the lot of them with my bare hands and feed the pieces to the dogs. I put my head in my hands for a bit. I was too shaken and angry to cry. All I wanted to do was lash out and hurt someone. Something, anything would do. I couldn't for the life of me understand why she would do this to me. I had never cheated on her, never hurt her in any way. All I ever did was work so that we could have a good life together. All she had to do was tell me I was working too many hours and I would have cut back, but she didn't. I had a thought and pulled up the agency's website. I found it was part of a much larger organization based out of New York and had offices across the country. So I looked and found an email address for the CEO and the chairman of the board. I wrote an email threatening a lawsuit and attached copies of the video, then sent it off. I looked around and saw the pictures of Kelly and me on the end tables and on the wall. I lost it and tore them all down, ripping her image out of every one of them. I was looking for something else to destroy when I heard the doorbell ring. "Who is that?" I wondered. I looked through the peephole and saw Julie with another woman from Kelly's office. I couldn't remember her name at the moment I opened the door. I growled at them and they jumped back, shocked at my anger. Julie begged to talk, and I questioned their motives, expressing my reluctance to hear anything they had to say. Julie asked if they could come inside, and I pulled out my phone to start a voice recording. Opening the door, I let them in and sat down on the couch, demanding to know the reason for their visit. When asked if they could have something to drink, I declined, urging them to say what they came to say and leave. Julie exchanged nervous glances with the others before conveying that she had talked to Kelly earlier, who was very upset. I responded indifferently and sarcastically, suggested that they could make it up to me by drastic actions. They stared at me in shock, and Julie protested that I couldn't mean such things, reminding me that Kelly was my wife. In response, I handed her the letter Kelly left for me. Julie read it, and after returning it to me, she apologized. I accused them of being complicit in Kelly's actions and criticized their behavior in the video. Julie apologized again, stating that Kelly misled them into thinking I was okay with it. Expressing my dissatisfaction, I told them it was time to leave. After a while, they turned for the door, but Julie turned back before leaving, suggesting that she could help me get over this. I dismissed the idea, emphasizing that I couldn't trust her, and urged them to leave and never return. They left, and I locked the door behind them. Later, I decided to drown my sorrows. I drove to the convenience store on the corner, purchased a 6-pack of beer, and a couple of packs of cigarettes. I had quit drinking and smoking when we got married, but I decided to hell with it. Upon my return, I sat on the balcony, drank my beer, and ended up smoking several cigarettes before deciding to turn in for the night. The next day, I got up, showered, washed the beer and cigarette taste out of my mouth, dressed, and headed out. Looking online, I got directions to the gallery and realized I had just about enough time to get there by 9:30, so I headed out. After making a cup of coffee for the road, I pulled up to the Victorian house at the address on the invitation and was a bit surprised to see no other cars. Surely others would have been invited to this showing, I thought. Exiting the car, I approached the door. Before I could knock, it swung open, revealing a petite blonde woman in her early 20s. She greeted me as Mr. Carmichael, mentioning that I was right on time. Introducing herself as Dr. Adrestia Ramnusha, she extended her hand, and I shook it. She confirmed that I was the only one attending the meeting and guided me into a room with a covered portrait on an easel. Instructing me to take a seat, she uncovered the portrait, cautioning that it might be shocking. As she lifted the cover, I saw a painting of Kelly lying in a strange bed with Jake beside her. Dr. Ramnusha apologized and covered the portrait again. I questioned how she obtained the painting and whether Kelly was behind this, expressing my lack of a museed fluid. She clarified that Kelly had not put her up to it and suggested we go to her office for an explanation. I followed her upstairs into an office filled with old books and scrolls. She pointed to a chair in front of her cluttered desk, instructing me to sit while she made tea. Confused about how tea could make the situation better, I sat down, still in shock. Dr. Ramnusha handed me a cup of tea, ensuring that I drank it. Strangely, I began to feel a bit better after a few sips. She smiled and sat down at her desk, and I demanded an explanation for what was happening. She nodded and explained that she helps people like me get justice. She had been watching my wife for some time and became actively involved after Kelly wrote the letter to me. She asked if I had any idea about what was going on, and I admitted that I didn't. I interrogated how she found out about the letter, questioning if she was trailing or spying on us and if she was a private investigator. She replied that she wasn't precisely a private investigator, but explained that overseeing all marriages was her expertise for many years. She asked me to watch a video on the monitor, which appeared to be taken in my apartment. The video showed Kelly writing the letter at the kitchen table, and below it, words scrolled through, reflecting Kelly's thoughts as she wrote. The words revealed her intention to prevent me from filing for divorce and her plan to counter by citing cruelty or misuse, as advised by Jake. I asked about the words below the video, and Adrestia explained that they were Kelly's thoughts as she wrote the letter. I questioned how it was possible, and she simply stated that it was proprietary. I asserted that Kelly's claim of misuse was a lie, as I had never done anything like that. Adrestia acknowledged that she knew, but unfortunately in this state, the court would be more inclined to believe Kelly than me, and she was aware of that fact. I remarked that my lawyer didn't mention the details Adrestia shared. She acknowledged that lawyers in the system were the real winners in divorces, and emphasized that seeking justice or fair treatment was futile. Adrestia revealed that Kelly had informed Jake about her plan during a video on the monitor, showing them snuggling together in plane seats. Jake asked if she left the letter for me, and she admitted to it. He predicted my reaction and questioned what she would do when I filed for divorce. She responded that her lawyer would claim I smack and misused her, even though she didn't mention it in the letter. The video ended, leaving me stunned. Expressing disbelief, I questioned how she could fabricate such a story without consequences. Adrestia explained that people pull off such things all the time. I then expressed confusion about Kelly's motives, highlighting my faithfulness, consistent provision, and hard work for our future. Adrestia suggested that perhaps I'd been too focused on finances and not spending enough time with her, though she clarified that it didn't justify Kelly's actions. I mentioned that Kelly could have communicated with me, and I would have given up the second job if I knew this would happen. Adrestia responded that it was no assurance this wouldn't have occurred anyway. I inquired about her suggestions for my course of action. She proposed assisting me in seeking some form of justice and asked if I would be open to that. I affirmed my willingness, seeking more details on how it could be done. Adrestia reminded me of my notion from the previous night, wearing a mischievous grin. Perplexed, I asked what she was referring to. She maintained the mischievous smile, rose from behind her desk, and approached me. Taking my hand, she signaled for me to stand and mentioned that their ship had already sailed early that morning. I acknowledged that I knew, having paid for the cruise. Adrestia agreed, suggesting that we should pay them a visit. Astonished, I wondered how we could accomplish that. She smiled as she held my hand. Suddenly, we found ourselves standing on the deck of a massive cruise ship. I glanced around and saw a few people on the deck, but I did spot Kelly and the idiot standing by the railing. She wore a tiny two-piece bikini that left little to the imagination. They were locked in an embrace, and Kelly was caressing the front of his suit. I cleared my throat to get their attention. Kelly expressed surprise and questioned how I got there and who was with me. I responded, stating that I represented Justice and was there to ensure she paid for what she had done to her husband. Kelly and Jake chuckled at my statement. In a threatening tone, Jake demanded to know what I intended to do. As they started walking toward us, they slipped on something, lost their balance, and tumbled over the railing. I rushed to the railing, and Adrestia joined me. We peered over the railing, and Adrestia restrained me. Initially, I didn't comprehend why. Just as they descended about 15 feet, the largest shark I could ever imagine emerged from the water, its mouth wide open, revealing rows of large, jagged teeth. The mouth of this creature had to be easily 30 feet wide. I couldn't recall ever feeling so terrified. As I looked, Kelly screamed loudly, her eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, both she and Jake were in the shark's mouth. The monster closed its mouth, sending geysers of blood back up to the deck. Then it silently slipped back under the water. I heard cries from the deck and observed other passengers vomiting on the deck. Some had phones out, likely recording videos. Adrestia pulled me back, and I heard klaxons blaring. Crew members hurried to the railing to assess if there was anything salvageable, but it was too late. Adrestia grabbed my hand, and suddenly we were back in her office. I felt nauseated, but she swiftly held my head in her hands, and the nausea subsided almost immediately. I expressed shock and inquired if the events genuinely happened. Adrestia seated me back in the chair and poured another cup of tea. She confirmed that it did happen, handing me the tea and suggesting that it would help. I took a sip of the tea and immediately felt much improved. I was still grappling with what I had just witnessed, but the sense of shock had dissipated. Simultaneously, I noticed something else. I felt no remorse whatsoever, no sadness, nothing. I felt nothing for what transpired with Kelly and Jake. I looked at Adrestia, seeking answers. Adrestia informed me that the tea provided would help me cope with the situation, and indeed, I felt much better after finishing it. Despite the fact that I was once deeply in love with Kelly, there was an absence of sadness over her demise, leading me to question my emotions. Addressing my concern, Adrestia reassured me not to worry about any lack of emotion, attributing it to a side effect of the tea that numbs negative emotions. Curious about Kelly's whereabouts, I inquired, acknowledging that I understood she was deceased. Adrestia acknowledged my religious upbringing, noting that I likely wondered about the afterlife. She invited me to follow her back to the showroom where she had unveiled the portrait. There, she uncovered the painting, revealing a drastic change. The portrait now depicted her face frozen in fear, her eyes wide, her mouth open in an eternal scream. Behind her face was the shark's maw, row after row of sharp teeth, awaiting her. Adrestia gestured towards the painting, stating that it represented where Kelly was now, forever captured in her final moments. She explained that Kelly would spend eternity in that portrayal, regretting her decision to wrong me, a sort of self-made hell. As she hung the portrait on a vacant spot of the wall, among rows of similar paintings, Adrestia revealed that all the individuals depicted were cheaters, each one regretting their decisions for eternity. I expressed my realization, and she confirmed, emphasizing that this was her concept of justice. She had been carrying out this work for a significant period, and the walls were not even halfway filled. Curious about the duration of her endeavor, I inquired, and Adrestia responded that she had been engaged in this work for a longer time than I could imagine, expressing a sense of sadness. She took my head in her hands and looked at me intently. For a moment, I thought I saw a tear in her eye. Adrestia mentioned that the upcoming days would be challenging, but assured me that she would always be with me, residing in my heart regardless of age. She encouraged me to go on and live a long life, suggesting the possibility of finding a new love, as she believed someone was waiting for me. After a kiss on the cheek, I felt content, and even now, I can't fully explain the feeling. She accompanied me to the door and closed it behind me. After I left, shaken, I drove to my second job and turned in my notice. The manager wasn't too upset, but he understood and wished me well. We left on a good note, and he said he would have my final check mailed to me. I drove back home, grabbed a beer, and sat in front of the television. For a while, I thought it strange that I still didn't feel any remorse over Kelly's demise. I turned on the television and found that the video of the shark incident had already made the news. It turned out that several people had taken video of what happened. As I flipped through the channels, I saw that several news programs were already talking about the feasibility that such a large beast could exist. All of the reports said they were still waiting for the identity of the sufferers to be released. Going online, I found that video of the shark had also gone viral on social media. It was everywhere: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, you name it. I couldn't watch the video, so I turned my computer off. I grabbed a pile of trash bags and went through the apartment, collecting all of Kelly's things. Before long, I had everything packed up and stuffed in her car. I called her mother and told her that she needed to come get it. "Why, Sam?" she asked. I told her about Kelly's cheating, but didn't tell her about Kelly getting eaten by a giant shark. She was understandably upset and said her and Kelly's father would be by to pick it all up later that day. They came by that afternoon and left. After making a tearful plea to patch things up with her, I made it clear that no reconciliation was possible. I still didn't tell them about her getting eaten. I figured they would learn about that soon enough. After they left, I dressed and went to a bar and grill where I consumed a juicy burger and several beers. I got through the rest of the weekend somehow and woke up late Monday since I was technically on vacation. I sat in front of the television with a bowl of cereal as a news report came on saying the offices of AA Travel Agency had been destroyed by fire. According to the report, everyone got out okay, but just barely an hour or so later, I got a call from Julie, who was more than a bit shaken up. She informed me about the office burning down, recounting the strange incident where Kelly's desk spontaneously caught fire. They narrowly escaped the flames. She mentioned receiving a peculiar text from Kelly just before the fire, containing references to sharks and the hounds of hell. Julie expressed confusion about the message, to which I replied that I had no idea. The conversation ended, and I sat back smiling to myself. I took a drive to see Adrestia and ask her about the fire, but the Victorian mansion that housed her gallery was gone. I sat there and looked at the empty lot, wondering what happened. After a while, I shook my head and drove home. Update. After a couple of weeks, I received word from the cruise line about Kelly's demise. They conveyed the news of her pass away and included a check covering the cost of my tickets, along with the payout from the accidental pass away and dismemberment policy linked to the tickets. I reached out to Linda, informing her that our separation was no longer necessary. While she offered condolences, they held no significance for me. A few weeks later, the travel agency's headquarters contacted me. They proposed a substantial sum of money in exchange for my silence and a commitment not to pursue legal action. Additionally, they revealed that the entire office where Kelly worked had been terminated, with considerations for a new team in their revamped office. After contemplating their offer, I decided to accept it. Kelly's parents organized a memorial service for their daughter, but I opted not to attend or send flowers. Although they were displeased, they acknowledged my feelings. Life continued, and it took quite some time before I resumed dating. With the elimination of my second job, I began frequenting the gym to regain fitness. The effort paid off, attracting attention from several women at my workplace. While I went on a few dates, I refrained from committing to a relationship. It took a couple of years before I felt ready to trust another woman at that level. Eventually, I found someone, Marcy, a coworker who went through a divorce after discovering her husband in their marital bed. We've been dating for a while now, and I'm seriously contemplating proposing to her. All in all, life is looking up. Dora Adrestia moved on to the next case that came her way. One day, however, she sat down at her desk and took a long look at everything, the pain, the anguish, and the pleas for help. Overwhelmed, she put her head in her hands and did something she hadn't done for 2 millennia. She wept.
I was driving home late from work, my mind focused on the day's tasks and how long it had taken to wrap everything up. My boss had been insistent that I stay late to finalize some reports, and though I hated being delayed, I'd done what needed to be done. The roads were unusually clear, which should have been a relief, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the evening was taking an odd turn. Then my phone rang. It was the neighbor, the one who rarely called unless something was seriously off. His voice was cautious but firm. "Look, I don't mean to pry, but I thought you should know. Your wife is at that coffee shop on Elm Street. She's sitting with some guy, laughing pretty loudly. I don't think he's one of your friends." I tightened my grip on the wheel, my jaw clenching. "Thanks for letting me know," I said flatly before hanging up. That conversation replayed in my head as I pressed harder on the gas, my patience thinning by the second. By the time I reached home, the house was dark, and her car wasn't in the driveway. I parked and sat for a moment, scanning for any sign of her return. Nothing. I tried calling her, twice. No answer. Frustration simmered as I debated whether to call the neighbor back and ask for more details. Before I could act, headlights cut through the darkness. A sleek, unfamiliar car pulled into our driveway. She stepped out, looking slightly flustered but composed, and walked toward the house. The moment she stepped inside, I didn't waste time. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked, my voice firm but measured. She seemed taken aback, her eyes darting toward me. "Relax," she said, dropping her bag on the counter. "It's been a long day." "Don't give me that," I shot back. "You weren't answering your phone. And then there's the coffee shop incident. What was that about?" She sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "All right, listen. There's this guy at work, you know, the annoying one I've mentioned. He's been pestering me lately. Today, he asked for my address, said he wanted to drop something off. I turned him down. Apparently, he didn't like that because next thing I know, he's whining to the boss. And guess what? The boss took his side. I got fired." Her words hung in the air for a moment. "Fired?" I repeated, my tone sharper now. "And what about the coffee shop? Why were you there?" She held up a hand. "I'm getting to that. I went with my friend and her boyfriend to," she paused. "Celebrate my newfound unemployment, I guess." She stepped away for a moment, and that's probably when your neighbor saw me with her boyfriend. Nothing shady. I crossed my arms, unimpressed. "And you didn't think to explain this earlier?" She shrugged. "I needed to cool off first." "Cool off?" "We're not exactly in a position to lose your income right now," I snapped. "There are bills to pay, responsibilities." "You're telling me you've got no backup plan?" She hesitated. Well, she started, and I could tell I wasn't going to like what followed. "My friend's boyfriend said he might have a job for me. He didn't give details, but he's willing to come by and discuss it." I shook my head, already regretting where this was going. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "Some random guy is going to come into my house to offer you a job? Is this the best option we have?" She met my gaze, her expression firm. "Right now, it's the only option. Unless you've got a better idea, we don't have much choice." I hated the logic in her words, but she wasn't wrong. Reluctantly, I nodded. "Fine. Let's see what he has to say." That evening, after we had spent hours cleaning up the house and preparing the grill, I was finally starting to feel a sense of order. The yard was immaculate, the grill was ready to fire up, and I'd even managed to grab a cold beer before relaxing for a moment. My wife seemed a little distracted as she set the table, but I chalked it up to the stress of the day. Just as I leaned back to enjoy the brief calm, the doorbell rang, breaking the silence. I had no idea that what waited on the other side of the door would ruin my evening entirely. When I opened the door, I immediately regretted it. Standing there was my wife's friend, a woman who had a knack for stirring up trouble wherever she went. She was wearing one of her usual attention-grabbing outfits, leather miniskirt, pink tights, and a crop top that seemed more suited for a nightclub than a friendly visit. But it wasn't just her appearance that threw me off. Standing next to her was a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a luxury magazine, clad in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. The contrast between the two was jarring, to say the least. Before I could say anything, they barged in as if they owned the place. I watched in silent irritation as the man gave the room a quick glance and muttered under his breath, "Looks like a dump." That was the last straw. I stepped forward and said, "What did you just say about my house?" He blinked, clearly startled, before backtracking. "Oh, nothing," he said smoothly. "Just thinking out loud. My mistake." He offered his hand, and I shook it firmly, making sure he understood I wasn't one to be disrespected in my own home. Despite my irritation, I allowed them to stay. My wife seemed eager for this meeting, and I didn't want to make a scene, yet. As we all sat down, the man began to talk about the supposed job opportunity he had in mind. He had a way of speaking that was both vague and overly confident. Every time I pressed for details, job responsibilities, location, anything tangible, he deflected, focusing instead on how lucrative the position could be. "It's not hard work," he said with a grin. "But it's crucial that you pay attention to the details. That's where the money is." As he spoke, I couldn't help but notice how his eyes wandered, not to me, not even around the room, but directly to my wife's chest. I felt my fists clench under the table, but I kept my composure. She either didn't notice or pretended not to, and I decided it wasn't the right moment to call him out. Still, it was infuriating. I stayed quiet, letting him continue his pitch, though my patience was wearing thin. My wife's friend, meanwhile, added nothing of value to the conversation. She giggled at every other sentence he spoke, clearly smitten with his charm and expensive suit. If anything, her presence made the situation more unbearable. I wondered why my wife tolerated someone like her, someone who seemed to bring chaos wherever she went. But I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on getting through this absurd meeting. After what felt like an eternity of vague promises and evasive answers, the man finally pulled out a small card. It wasn't even a proper business card, just a piece of paper with a phone number scrawled on it in pen. "Here's my number," he said, sliding it across the table. "Think it over this weekend. If you're interested, come by on Monday, and we'll get started." I glanced at the card but didn't touch it. "We'll think about it," I said, my tone making it clear that I wasn't sold on the idea. He stood, adjusting his expensive suit, and flashed a practiced smile. "Good. I'll be expecting your call." With that, he and my wife's friend made their exit, leaving the house quieter but far tenser than before. I didn't say anything immediately, letting the silence stretch as I stared at the card on the table. The oddest thing about the evening wasn't the awkward company or the vague job pitch, it was the fact that neither of them touched the food. My wife and I had put effort into the spread, grilling meats to perfection and preparing sides that always received compliments. Friends and family alike praised our cooking, but these two acted as though the food didn't exist. The man, dressed in his overpriced suit, barely acknowledged the table, while my wife's friend giggled and twirled her hair as if she were at a cocktail party. Their behavior only deepened my irritation. As the night wound down and the house finally quieted, I couldn't hold my tongue any longer. I turned to my wife, who was tidying up the kitchen, and said, "That guy isn't the right choice for you. He barely gave any details about the job, and he couldn't stop staring at your chest the whole time. Plus, your friend, she's a walking disaster. Nothing good comes from her ideas." My wife looked up sharply, her expression already defensive. "What do you want me to do?" she snapped, her voice rising. "Do you think we have a line of better options? The mortgage is due next month. Sure, we can cover this one, but what about the next? We need another income, and fast. Her words came out like a volley of accusations, each one landing harder than the last. I held my ground, refusing to be swayed by her frustration. We'll figure something out, I said firmly. But taking a job from some shady guy who refuses to explain what you'll be doing? That's not the solution. Especially with your friend involved. You're smarter than this. She bristled at my comment, her eyes narrowing. Smarter, she repeated, her voice now a shout. Do you think I'm stupid? That I'm going to fall for some scam or ruin everything? This is temporary, just until we're back on our feet. After that, I'll find something better. Her words were heated, but there was a determination behind them that I recognized. She wasn't going to back down, no matter what I said. The argument hung heavy in the air, neither of us willing to concede. I watched as she threw her dish towel onto the counter and stepped away. You don't understand, she muttered. This isn't about pride or convenience. It's about survival. If I don't take this chance, we'll fall behind. Can you live with that? Her words left a bitter taste in my mouth, but I had no response that wouldn't escalate things further. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Look, I'm tired. Tomorrow's a big day. I've already received an email about some event they're organizing in my honor. Apparently, they're going to announce some special condition for me. Her tone softened, but her resolve remained. I need to be ready for this. I watched as she turned and headed for the bedroom, leaving me alone in the kitchen. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could hear her footsteps retreating down the hall. She didn't offer any further explanation, nor did she wait for my response. I was left with nothing but questions and a lingering sense of unease about everything that had happened that evening. For now, I stayed quiet, unsure of how to navigate what lay ahead. When I woke up the next morning, the first thing I noticed was my wife standing in front of the mirror, adjusting an outfit that immediately made my eyebrows raise. It was far from the professional or comfortable attire I'd expect for a first day at work. Instead, she wore a fitted blouse that plunged far too low and a skirt that ended well above the knee. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I sat up and asked, "What's going on? Don't you think you'd be better off in something more practical?" She glanced at me through the mirror and shrugged. My friend suggested this, she said casually, as though that explained everything. She told me it's important to make a strong first impression. Her tone was nonchalant, but I couldn't ignore the unease building in my chest. Besides, she added, turning to face me, it's my first day. They're going to be looking at my appearance, so I might as well use it to my advantage. I frowned, unable to let the comment slide. Just make sure this doesn't turn into another situation like your last job, I said, keeping my voice even. She sighed, clearly annoyed. You're overthinking it, she snapped. This is just how things are. And I don't have time for this right now. I'm already running late. I watched as she grabbed her bag and headed for the door. Where's the office, anyway? I called after her. But she didn't stop, merely waving a hand dismissively as she disappeared down the hallway and out the door. The sound of her car pulling out of the driveway left me sitting there, still full of unanswered questions. As the day wore on, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something about all of this was off. I decided to call her around midday, curious about how things were going. When she answered, her voice was rushed, almost frantic, and there was a cacophony of voices in the background. It's been crazy, she said, barely pausing to breathe. They threw me straight into a crisis. I'll explain everything when I get home. Before I could press for details, she ended the call, leaving me more uneasy than before. She finally came home late that evening, the smell of alcohol lingering faintly on her breath. Her cheeks were flushed, and there was a looseness in her demeanor that suggested she'd had a few drinks. So, how was your first day? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She flopped onto the couch and waved a hand vaguely. Busy, she said. A lot of running around. Errands, meetings, stuff like that. Her explanation was as vague as it was unsatisfying. That's it? I pressed. Running around? She nodded, not meeting my eyes. They're still figuring out where I fit in, she said. It's a flexible role. For now, I'm just helping out wherever they need me. Her words didn't sit right with me, but I decided to let it go for now. And the special condition, are they mentioned in the email? I asked. She perked up slightly at that, a small smile forming. Oh, right. They're planning some sort of secret corporate event. They'll announce the details soon. All I know is that it's happening in the next few days. The way she spoke about it was odd, too casual, almost dismissive. I leaned back, crossing my arms. This all feels strange, I said bluntly. The secrecy, the lack of details. Are you sure this is legit? She laughed lightly, shaking her head. You're overreacting, she said. It's just how they do things. They like surprises. Keeps things interesting. Her response didn't do much to ease my concerns, but I didn't push further. As she got up and headed for the bedroom, she added, "Don't worry so much. The next few days are going to be an adventure." And with that, she disappeared down the hall, leaving me alone with my thoughts. A few days passed, and things between my wife and me seemed to settle into an uneasy rhythm. She started dressing more conservatively again, which was a relief, and her behavior didn't raise any immediate red flags. However, her silence about the details of her new job persisted. Every time I asked, she would brush off the question with vague answers about adjusting to a new role. I tried to let it go, figuring I would eventually learn more, but the lack of transparency gnawed at me. Then, one morning, I walked into the bedroom and found her slipping into a tight black dress that left little to the imagination. The sight stopped me in my tracks. "What are you doing?" I asked, my tone firm. "You're not wearing that out." She turned to me with an exasperated look. "Relax," she said. "I'm not wearing it for myself." That response didn't make much sense to me. "If not for you, then for who?" I pressed. She rolled her eyes and explained, "It's for my friend. I'm giving it to her." I narrowed my eyes, already suspicious. "This wouldn't happen to be that unreliable friend of yours, would it?" She bristled at my question, her tone turning defensive. "You have no right to call her that," she shot back. "Besides, I've made new friends at work. One of them might come over soon. We've been planning a little get-together here at the house." That caught me off guard. "What get-together?" I asked sharply. But before I could get an answer, she grabbed her bag and left, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. Later that day, when she returned home, she seemed in high spirits. The corporate event was wonderful, she said as she walked in, a bright smile on her face. Everyone had a great time. I tried to probe for details. "Did you take any photos?" I asked, expecting at least some evidence of this supposedly enjoyable event. She hesitated before shaking her head. "No, I didn't. I was too busy enjoying the moment." Her response didn't sit well with me, but I let it slide for the moment. That evening, as I scrolled through social media, I stumbled across a story posted by her so-called unreliable friend. It showed her on a yacht, laughing and posing with a group of people. Among them was a woman wearing a dress that looked suspiciously like the one my wife had claimed to give away earlier. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I decided to confront her. "So, when were you planning to tell me about the yacht?" I asked, my tone as calm as I could manage. She looked genuinely confused for a moment before replying, "I wasn't there. That must have been a different event. I wasn't buying it." "You expect me to believe that? Then why is someone wearing your dress?" She waved it off, saying, "I told you, I gave it to my friend. My department celebrated at the office. It was low-key. We had some drinks, played games, nothing extravagant." Her explanation did little to ease my skepticism. "What kind of corporate event is that?" I asked. "Office parties and yacht parties don't exactly match up." She shrugged, unbothered. "I know it sounds boring, but that's how it was. And anyway, remember that get-together I mentioned? It's happening in 2 days. You'll get to meet some of my co-workers then. The casual way she brought it up left me stunned. 2 days? I repeated, incredulous. And you're just telling me now? She didn't seem fazed by my reaction. We'll make it work, she said breezily. It'll be fine. Besides, there's someone very important coming. You'll see. I frowned, the unease in my chest growing stronger. Who is this important guest? I asked. She smiled, a hint of mystery in her eyes. You'll find out soon enough. The day of the party started early for me. I had promised to make sure everything was ready, so I enlisted the help of a couple of close friends and drove out to the local farm to gather fresh ingredients. The ride was light-hearted, with the guys cracking jokes about how much effort I was putting into an event where I didn't even know most of the guests. One of them quipped that my wife must have been recruited by the FBI with all the secrecy surrounding her new job. We all laughed, but deep down, the thought wasn't entirely absurd. Still, I brushed it off and focused on getting the house in order. By the time we returned and began setting up, the atmosphere shifted from casual to professional. The grill was fired up, the tables were arranged, and the house was spotless. As the evening approached, a sleek bus rolled up to the driveway, and out came a mix of people, some in tuxedos, others in designer dresses. It was a bizarre sight, a blend of formal elegance and casual charm that I wasn't prepared for. My wife stepped out last, her expression beaming with approval as she surveyed the setup. You did great, she said, leaning in for a quick kiss before being intercepted by a man I immediately recognized. It was her boss, the same man who had shown up before with her troublesome friend. This time, he was carrying a bottle of what looked like very expensive liquor. This is the secret guest? I asked, my voice flat. She nodded, clearly pleased with herself. He brought something special for the occasion, she said, as though that made up for everything else. The party quickly got underway, with the guests mingling, laughing, and drinking. I tried to keep myself busy, checking on the food and making sure everything ran smoothly, but my attention kept drifting to her boss. He didn't stray far from her side. Wherever she went, he followed, his smile never faltering. At one point, he was joined by another woman, a new face, who introduced herself as a co-worker. She complimented my wife, gushing about her generosity and specifically mentioning the dress she'd given away. It's stunning, she said. Your wife has amazing taste. I bit back my irritation and joined the conversation, determined to redirect it. So, what exactly does your company do? I asked, my tone sharp but polite. Her boss smiled, his answer as vague as ever. We have a strict confidentiality policy, he said smoothly. But I can tell you that we work with some very important clients, handling investments and high-level transactions. It was a non-answer, but I let it slide for the moment. My wife chimed in, talking about how much she'd learned and how she'd been excelling in her role. Her boss nodded in agreement, adding that she was already being considered for a promotion. The rest of the evening passed with me playing the reluctant host. While I made small talk with the guests, my focus never left the trio, my wife, her boss, and the co-worker. Their dynamic was unsettling. Every time I approached, the conversation shifted, leaving me feeling like an outsider in my own home. When the last guest finally left, I wasted no time addressing the issue. That boss of yours, I began. He didn't leave your side all night. What's going on? She sighed, her tone patient but firm. Yes, he's intense, but that's just how he is. It's part of the job. And you know what? It's paying off. I'm getting a promotion soon. It might mean working late, but it's temporary. I shook my head, frustration bubbling to the surface. Your job is starting to feel like a spy movie, I said. All these secrets, the weird guests, the late nights. It's exhausting. She gave me a small smile, one that was meant to reassure but only annoyed me further. I told you it's temporary. Just trust me on this. I stared at her, trying to gauge if there was any point in arguing. She seemed resolute, her mind already made up. "I'll make it worth your while," she added, her tone lightening. "There's something in this for both of us. When the time comes, you'll see. Just trust me." I sighed heavily, waving a hand in reluctant agreement. "Fine," I muttered. "Do what you have to do." Over the next week, my wife's work schedule became relentless. She started coming home later and later, often looking completely drained but oddly satisfied. I didn't press her for details immediately, figuring she'd share when she was ready. But her vague explanations and the constant delays made it hard for me to shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. She'd walk in, drop her bag, and collapse on the couch, muttering about how much she'd accomplished that day. I watched, unsure if I should admire her dedication or question the circumstances of her new role. Then, one evening, she came bursting through the door with an energy I hadn't seen in days. Her face was lit up with excitement, and before I could even ask what was going on, she launched into her news. "You won't believe this," she said, practically bouncing on her heels. "I've been invited to a major business conference. It's a huge deal. I'm going to be presenting a new service our company is rolling out." I raised an eyebrow, more curious than excited. "You're presenting? But you just started there. How do you even know what you're presenting?" She laughed, waving off my concerns. "They haven't told me yet. I'll find out soon enough. It's all part of their strategy." "Isn't that exciting?" I wasn't sure exciting was the word I'd use, but I held my tongue for the moment. "Who's going with you?" I asked, trying to mask my growing skepticism. She rattled off a list of names, including her boss. "Why is he going?" I asked bluntly. "What does he need to be there for?" She rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed by the question. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "He's the face of the company. It's important for him to be there to represent us. Besides, I'm not going alone. My friend from the team and a couple of others are coming too. It's a group effort." Her dismissal of my concerns didn't sit well with me, but I pressed on. "And what about your other friend, the one you gave the dress to? Why isn't she going?" My wife's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place crossing her face. "She's not with the company anymore," she said carefully. Apparently, she had some issues with the boss. There was a loud argument in his office last week, and she ended up leaving. I didn't get the full story. Her explanation only added to my unease. "What kind of issues?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know. They didn't see eye to eye on something, I guess. It's none of my business. Anyway, it's a shame she won't be coming. She would have loved this." I nodded slowly, my mind racing with unanswered questions. My wife seemed determined to move past the topic, her focus already shifting to her upcoming trip. The next day, she was a whirlwind of activity, packing her bags and finalizing details for the conference. I watched her dart around the house, her excitement palpable. She seemed genuinely thrilled about the opportunity, which made it hard for me to voice my lingering doubts without coming across as unsupportive. Still, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was off. Finally, with her suitcase packed and her itinerary confirmed, she stood by the door, ready to leave. "Wish me luck," she said with a smile, leaning in for a quick kiss. I nodded, forcing a smile of my own. "Good luck," I said, though my chest felt heavy as I watched her walk out the door. The sound of her car pulling out of the driveway lingered long after she was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing sense of unease. During her business trip, I tried to stay in touch with my wife as much as possible. I called her a couple of times each day, but more often than not, the calls went unanswered. When she did pick up, her tone was hurried, and she would always claim to be in the middle of a conference session or meeting. "It's non-stop here," she'd say. "I'll call you later." Later rarely came. After the first couple of days, I stopped expecting a response, deciding instead to wait for her to come home and give a full account of her trip. Meanwhile, I spent those 4 days venting to my friends about the whole situation. They listened, offering their own theories about what could be going on. Some of them suggested I was reading too much into it, but others were just as suspicious as I was. They urged me to keep an eye on things and to trust my instincts. It was good advice, though it didn't make the waiting any easier. By the time she finally returned, I was ready for answers. She walked through the door carrying a suitcase and a smile, but what caught my attention was the shiny new iPhone in her hand. "Where did you get that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She held it up proudly. "It's a gift from the company," she said. "Can you believe it?" They handed it out to everyone who went to the conference. Her excitement was palpable, but it only deepened my unease. "A gift, huh?" I said, crossing my arms. "And why are you back a day later than planned?" She hesitated for a moment before replying. "I stopped by my mom's place on the way home," she said. I gave her my old phone. She's been needing an upgrade, and this was the perfect opportunity. Her explanation was plausible enough, but something about it didn't sit right with me. "So, how was the conference?" I asked, steering the conversation back to the trip itself. She waved a hand dismissively. "It was fine. Busy, as you can imagine. A lot of presentations, a lot of networking. Nothing too exciting." Her vagueness was frustrating, but I didn't press further. I'd learned by now that pushing too hard only made her shut down completely. Over the next few days, her routine returned to the same pattern it had been before the trip. She started coming home late again, claiming to be swamped with work. The excuses piled up, each one less convincing than the last. It was as though the conference hadn't changed anything. If anything, it had made her even more elusive. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than she was letting on. I began to formulate a plan. Her new phone, the so-called gift, was too convenient, and the timing of her stop at her mother's house felt suspicious. I needed to see her old phone, the one she'd supposedly given away. If there was anything to uncover, it would likely be on that device. But how could I get my hands on it without raising suspicion? That's when it hit me. I'd have to visit her mother myself. If the phone was truly there, I'd find it. And if it wasn't, that would be a clue in itself. The plan began to take shape in my mind. I'd wait for the right moment, make up an excuse to drop by her mom's house, and retrieve the phone. It wasn't foolproof, but it was the best option I had. I just needed to act carefully and not let her catch on to what I was doing. The morning started off the same as usual. My wife left the house early, claiming to have another packed day at work. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my keys and headed to her mother's house. I'd called ahead to let her know I was coming, keeping my tone casual to avoid raising any suspicion. When I arrived, her mother greeted me warmly, as she always did. "Come in," she said, waving me toward the kitchen. "It's been a while since you visited." Once inside, I played the role of the concerned husband perfectly. I asked about my wife's visit a few days earlier, steering the conversation gently toward her demeanor and any details her mother might share. "She seemed fine," her mother said. "A bit tired, maybe, but happy." She gave me her old phone, which was sweet of her. Said she'd gotten a new one from work. I nodded, pretending not to already know this. "That's nice of her," I replied, keeping my tone light. After a bit more small talk, I decided it was time to act. "Actually, I had another reason for coming by," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I've got a friend who's into repairing old electronics. He's building some kind of high-tech project and needs spare parts. I thought maybe you had some old gadgets lying around you'd want to get rid of. I'd pay you for them, of course." Her eyes lit up. "Well, we do have some things we've been meaning to toss," she said. "Let me see what I can find." She returned a few minutes later with a small collection of items, a microwave that had seen better days, an outdated tablet, and, crucially, my wife's old phone. "Would these help?" she asked. I nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely," I said, pulling out some cash to hand her. This will really help my friend out." She seemed pleased, and we spent a bit more time chatting before I loaded the items into my car and headed out. On the way home, I made a quick detour to the local dump. The microwave and tablet went straight into the recycling bin, but the phone stayed with me. Once I was back at the house, I plugged it into charge, my heart pounding with anticipation. If there was anything on this device that could explain my wife's strange behavior, I was about to find it. When the phone powered up, I immediately started exploring. It didn't take long to stumble upon something alarming, a group chat labeled Big Holes. The name alone was enough to make my stomach churn, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it and began scrolling through the messages. What I found was a cesspool of explicit discussions about personal relationships and workplace antics. To my shock, the chat was filled with derogatory comments about the friend who had been fired, someone I'd thought my wife was close to. The messages painted a damning picture. They celebrated the woman's departure, with several participants agreeing that she was too moral for the kind of work they did. It was a chilling realization. Whatever my wife's job entailed, it wasn't the legitimate, professional environment she'd been describing. Instead, it seemed steeped in secrecy, manipulation, and outright unethical behavior. I sat back, the phone still in my hand, as the weight of the situation settled over me. Divorce seemed inevitable. There was no coming back from this level of deceit. But a part of me wanted more than just to walk away. I wanted proof, something solid to justify my suspicions and to ensure that whatever she was involved in couldn't hurt me further. If I could gather evidence, it might even serve as a safeguard for the future. One thing was clear, the name Big Holes was a red flag that couldn't be ignored. The realization of what I'd uncovered weighed heavily on me, but I knew I couldn't confront my wife without more information. Instead, I decided to reach out to her fired friend. I found her number and dialed, half expecting her not to answer. When she finally picked up, her voice was shaky, and I could tell she'd been crying. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone defensive. I took a deep breath and said, "I need to talk to you. It's about my wife." For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then, with a resigned sigh, she said, "Fine. Come over. I'll tell you everything." She gave me an address, and I arrived about 20 minutes later. Her apartment was small and cluttered, but it had a warm, lived-in feel. She invited me in, offering a seat on the couch before sitting down herself. For a moment, she seemed hesitant to speak, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for the right words. "This isn't easy for me," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you deserve to know the truth." She started with the basics, explaining that the secrecy surrounding the company wasn't just for business confidentiality. "It's an escort service," she said bluntly. "They recruit women under the guise of legitimate jobs, but the reality is much darker. They're expected to entertain clients and convince them to invest money into the company. Once the deposits are made, the clients are ghosted, and the money disappears." I felt my stomach churn as she described the operations. "Your wife," she continued, "is deeply involved. She's not just participating, she's thriving in that environment. The women there even compete to see who can service the most clients. It's disgusting." Her words were blunt and painful, but I forced myself to listen. She went on to explain why she'd been fired. "I refused to participate," she said firmly. "I told the boss I wouldn't do it, and he made it clear there was no place for someone like me in the company. I was thrown out with nothing." She paused, wiping away tears before continuing. "They have no tolerance for morality. You either play their game, or you're out." To back up her claims, she pulled out her phone and opened a folder filled with screenshots and videos. "This is what goes on there," she said, handing the phone to me. As I scrolled through the messages and footage, my worst fears were confirmed. Explicit conversations, incriminating videos, and degrading comments filled the screen. It was undeniable evidence of what my wife and her colleagues were involved in. My hands shook as I handed the phone back to her. "I want to take this to court," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. But I can't do it alone. I need someone willing to testify. She looked at me, her expression shifting from fear to determination. We've been wanting to do something for a long time, she admitted. But we were scared. Now, though, I think it's time. And I'm not the only one. There are at least 10 other women who were fired like me. We're ready to fight back. Her words filled me with a sense of purpose. For the first time, I felt like there was a way forward, a way to expose the truth and bring some semblance of justice to the situation. The fight was only beginning, but at least now, I wasn't alone. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to take action. I gathered all the evidence I'd collected, screenshots, videos, and testimony, and prepared an anonymous report to the police. Every detail was meticulously documented to ensure there was no room for doubt about what this so-called company was involved in. I described the illegal operations, the exploitation, and the blatant fraud. By the time I submitted the report, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Whatever happened next, I knew I'd done my part to expose the truth. Later that day, I heard through some contacts that the police had acted swiftly. They conducted a raid on the office, catching many of the staff red-handed. There were numerous arrests, and the operation was effectively shut down. The most significant victory was the arrest of the boss himself, the man who had orchestrated the entire scheme. It was a major blow to their operations, and I knew it would send shockwaves through everyone involved. My wife was among those taken in for questioning, but she was released later that day. When she arrived home, her face was a storm of anger and frustration. She slammed the door shut behind her and launched into a tirade. I lost my job because of this, she spat, her eyes blazing. The whole office was set up. Someone must have reported us. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her to finish. When she finally paused, I said calmly, "You mean the brothel?" Her reaction was immediate. Her face turned red, and she pointed a finger at me. "How dare you call it that?" she screamed. "You don't understand anything about what I was doing there." I didn't flinch. "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "I know everything. The escort services, the scams, the competitions. You think you can justify that?" She was livid. "You had no right to interfere," she shouted. "I was enjoying myself, making good money. Who are you to judge me?" I couldn't help but laugh at her audacity. "Enjoying yourself?" I said, shaking my head. "Well, you won't be enjoying much now. I have proof of your infidelity. You've betrayed me, and you've ruined yourself in the process." Her anger turned to desperation as she tried to defend herself. But I was done listening. I walked past her, grabbed a suitcase, and started throwing her belongings into it. She followed me, still shouting, but I didn't stop. The more she yelled, the more resolute I became. "You don't get to stay here after what you've done," I said. "You made your choices, and now you can live with the consequences." By the time I finished packing her things, she had gone from furious to tearful. But I wasn't moved. I opened the door and set the suitcase on the porch. "Go," I said firmly. "And don't come back." She stood there for a moment, staring at me as if waiting for me to change my mind. When I didn't, she finally picked up the suitcase and walked away. As the door clicked shut behind her, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, anger, and a lingering sense of betrayal swirled within me. But one thing was clear, I'd made the right choice. She was out of my life, and now I could start moving forward without her lies weighing me down. The divorce was finalized faster than I expected. I had prepared myself for a long, grueling process, but with the evidence I had, there was little she or her lawyer could contest. The court ruled decisively in my favor, granting me the majority of our shared assets and ensuring she had no claim to anything more. Watching her sit there, realizing how far she had fallen, was bittersweet. Part of me felt vindicated, the other part was simply tired. I didn't hate her anymore, I just wanted to move on. Her boss, the mastermind behind the entire operation, wasn't as lucky. The police investigation had uncovered more than enough to convict him, and the trial was a formality. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and the company's operations were dismantled completely. Hearing the verdict gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Knowing he couldn't exploit anyone else was a small victory in a much larger battle. My ex-wife moved in with her mother after everything fell apart. Jobless and disgraced, she had no choice but to retreat to the safety of family. I heard bits and pieces about her life from mutual acquaintances. She was struggling to find work and seemed to be floundering in the wake of her choices. I didn't take any pleasure in her suffering, but I couldn't say I felt sympathy either. Actions have consequences, and she was living with hers. For me, the decision to sell the house was an easy one. It held too many memories, too much weight from everything that had happened. The sale went smoothly, and I used the money to pay off the remaining debts that had loomed over us for years. Moving into a smaller, simpler home felt like shedding old skin. It was a fresh start, free from the ghosts of a life that no longer belonged to me. One of the unexpected outcomes of this ordeal was the gratitude I received from the women who had been victims of the company. The 10 former employees who had come forward to testify sent me a heartfelt message of thanks after the trial. They were rebuilding their lives, some pursuing education, others starting new careers. Knowing I'd played a small part in their journey toward healing was humbling. It reminded me that even in the darkest situations, there's room for good to emerge. Looking back on everything, I often ask myself how it got to this point. Could I have seen it coming? Could I have done something differently? The truth is, I don't think so. My wife's choices were her own, shaped by her values and priorities, or lack thereof. I trusted her because I wanted to believe in the life we were building together. When that trust was broken, it wasn't just about the lies or the betrayal, it was about the foundation we had built crumbling beneath me. But if there's one lesson I've taken from all of this, it's the importance of paying attention to the signs. The small inconsistencies, the gut feelings, the moments when things didn't add up, they were all there, whispering truths I didn't want to hear. Ignoring them didn't make them go away, it just delayed the inevitable. Now, I listen to those instincts. They're what guided me through this mess, and they're what I'll rely on moving forward. Today, my life is simpler, quieter, and infinitely more peaceful. I don't have all the answers, and I don't pretend to. But I know this, I've learned who I am, what I stand for, and what I won't tolerate. That clarity is worth more than anything I lost. It's not about winning or losing, it's about knowing when to walk away. And I did. I walked away, and I'm better for it.
The alarm sounded at its usual time, 6 a.m., and my wife, Anita, and I rose to begin our day. As I sat up on the edge of the bed and swung my feet to the floor, an audible groan escaped me. "What's the matter? You sound like an old man," she teased on her way to the bathroom. Feeling like an old man after the events of the previous night, I heard her laughter echoing from the bathroom as I reminisced about our passionate lovemaking. The evening had concluded with a particularly sensual act. Today marked the beginning of her week-long business trip, leaving me alone at home, a prospect I wasn't eagerly anticipating. The sound of the shower running tempted me to join her, but the memories of the previous night's exertions convinced me otherwise. When she returned to the bedroom, her mood was upbeat, contrasting with my self-pitying state. She encouraged me to rise and start the day, saying, "Come on, old man, get up and get going. We need 2 breadwinners to pay the mortgage on this place." With a nod, I replied, "All right, I'm moving," and stumbled into the bathroom to begin my morning routine. Later, we gathered downstairs for breakfast before she departed for the airport, and I made my way to work. Anita, an attorney, and I both worked at a medium-sized manufacturing plant in St. Louis. She specialized in negotiations and traveled with teams off-plant. This trip involved negotiating a new subcontract with a major aerospace firm in Denver. She traveled several times a year for similar negotiations, typically gone at least a week each time. At 35, she had graduated cum laude from the State University 12 years ago, standing at 5 feet 4 inches, weighing 125 pounds, with measurements of 34, 24, 35. I'm Jack Fillmore, 37, working as an engineer in the same company as my wife. Standing at 6 feet 1 inch and weighing 165 pounds, I work out to stay in shape. We both enjoyed playing golf and often formed a foursome with friends. We met at a company picnic, and it was love at first sight for me. It seemed the same for her, as after a whirlwind courtship, we got married 6 months later. We've been married for 7 years now and just bought the house we're living in. 3 months ago, it was the home where we planned to start our family, and Anita was going off her birth control pills upon her return from this trip. We were thrilled about having a family, and she intended to be a stay-at-home mom until the kids started school. Our parents, living in the area, were also anticipating our family expansion. After breakfast, I loaded Anita's travel bag into her car and gave her a goodbye kiss. Tears welled up in her eyes as she got into her car to leave. I expressed my hope that soon I wouldn't be traveling, so we wouldn't have to go through these goodbyes. She shared her dislike for goodbyes, and I reassured her that I felt the same way. I mentioned that I would see her on Friday evening, and we could have takeout so she could rest. She agreed, saying, "Sounds good, bye." I observed as she backed out of the garage and into the street. Waving as she left, I trudged into the house to complete my preparations for leaving for the office. Arriving at the workplace, I ascended to the engineering department, grabbed a cup of coffee from the break room, and headed to my desk. Barely settling in, my phone rang. I identified myself to the caller as Fillmore. My boss, Evan, asked me to come into his office. I agreed, picked up my coffee, and made my way to his office. Evan mentioned that he recalled me mentioning last Friday that Anita would be traveling this week. He then presented an opportunity. Gil Hawkins, our field service engineer in California, was sick and unable to handle a problem a customer in San Jose was having with one of our models. Given my experience with that model, Evan asked if I would like to head out to San Jose and check it out. I agreed, stating that there wasn't much happening at the office, and I was batching it this week. Evan instructed me to get Kathy to arrange my reservations and tickets, and to call the customer to let them know I was coming and find out the problem. Feeling more enthusiastic about life, I stopped by Evan's secretary Kathy's desk and informed her about my flight and reservation needs. Later, I called the customer from my desk to understand their problem before heading home to pack. On the way home, a plan formed in my mind. If I finished quickly, I could surprise my wife with a stop in Denver on my way home. The thought of spending a couple of days with her in Denver was becoming increasingly exciting. While waiting for my flight at the airport, I attempted to call Anita's cell phone, but she didn't answer. So I left a voicemail indicating I'd be staying at my folks for a couple of days and to reach me on my cell during the evenings. Everything worked out fine. I was at the customer's location Tuesday morning, made the necessary equipment adjustments, and had it checked out and running satisfactorily by the afternoon. Returning to my hotel, I called the airline and secured a flight that would get me to Denver at 9 p.m. Mountain Time. Checking out of the hotel in San Jose, I headed to the airport in San Francisco, where I had dinner. While eating, Anita called me on my cell, and we chatted for a few minutes. She inquired about my folks, and I responded as though I were at their house. She mentioned that negotiations were progressing, but she was tired and planned a quiet evening in her hotel room. We bid our goodbyes with expressions of love, and after eating, I boarded my 9:45 p.m. flight. I checked in at the desk at Anita's suite hotel, and after verifying my identity, they provided me with a card for entry to her suite. Entering her suite quietly, I noticed a lamp illuminating the computer table, and her laptop was on it, closed. However, there was no sign of Anita. I placed my suitcase down and checked the bedroom and bathroom, finding them empty. I thought to myself that she probably hadn't returned to her room yet. I decided to sit down and wait, or perhaps go down and check the lounge to see if she was there. I then observed that the door to the adjacent room was slightly open. Approaching it, the door swung open silently on well-lubricated hinges. Surveying the living room and the adjoining suite, I found no one. Perplexed, I entered the room and suddenly heard a groan emanating from the bedroom. My gut tightened, and I broke into a sweat as I quietly approached the bedroom door. Although my heart may not have ceased, my breath certainly did. Witnessing the scene in the dimly lit room, Anita was unclothed, facing me, engaged with a man whose face remained unseen. My initial urge was to burst in, confront her, and confront the man, but reason prevailed over my emotions. Slowly backing away from the door, I returned to her suite. Retrieving the digital camera from my travel bag, brought along for souvenir pictures, I returned to the other bedroom door. Turning off the flash and adjusting the camera for dim light photos, I calmly captured several images of the bed scene without their awareness. They were so engrossed in their activities that their eyes remained closed, oblivious to their surroundings. Before heading back to her suite, I examined an open briefcase on the table, finding a business card with the name Sam Harris, the chief negotiator for our company. I pocketed the card. Back in her suite, I utilized a camera-computer interface cable I had with me to connect the camera to her laptop. Since our laptops had the same photo program, I easily downloaded a picture from my camera and set it as her desktop background. I then packed my camera into my travel bag and left her suite quietly. Before departing, I heard her cry out in climax. I nearly broke down right there, but pressed on towards the elevator. After returning the entry card to the desk, I contacted the airline to inquire about the next flight back to St. Louis. Luckily, a 6:30 a.m. flight was available, promising a 9:30 a.m. arrival home. With some luck, I calculated this would coincide with the time Anita would be opening her laptop at the negotiating table. She would then realize she had been caught, signaling the end of our marriage. Returning to the airport, I checked into a nearby motel where sleep eluded me. I kept replaying the distressing scene from her hotel bedroom. I wept, allowing my pain to manifest in tears. By the time I left the motel at 5 a.m., I had exhausted my tears, resolved to conclude our marriage swiftly. Upon arriving in St. Louis, my cell phone began to ring. As I entered my car and checked the caller, I saw it was Anita. I turned it off and headed home. Upon entering the house, the phone was ringing, but checking the caller ID revealed it was Anita again. Letting it go to the answering machine, I heard her sobbing on the phone. She pleaded with me to call her right away, expressing that she needed to talk with me and it was important. I ignored her tearful plea, changed my clothes, rented a U-Haul, and returned home to start packing. If my calculations were correct, she would arrive around 4 p.m., and I aimed to be out of the house by then. It took a couple of hours, but I successfully moved all my personal belongings to a rental storage unit. Before packing, I contacted our lawyer and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. After unloading my belongings at the storage unit, I met with our lawyer and requested the initiation of divorce proceedings. While tempted to cite infidelity as the cause, I opted for incompatibility, reserving the infidelity accusation in case she contested the divorce. I also requested him to draft a new will designating my brother as a beneficiary. Making a stop at the bank, I moved half of our savings and checking balance to new accounts solely in my name. Subsequently, I contacted my investment advisor to perform a similar transfer for our accounts with him. With a heavy heart, I drove to my parents' house, carrying my suitcase with me. I entered through the open door, and my mother, spotting me first, exclaimed loudly, "Jack, where have you been? Anita has been calling here several times looking for you. Did you inform her that you were staying here?" My retired father joined us, and I sat down to explain everything to them. They were astonished when I revealed Anita's infidelity and the end of our marriage. I inquired if I could stay with them for a few days until I found a furnished apartment, and they agreed. My calculations seemed fairly accurate because around 6 p.m., as we were sitting down to eat, the doorbell rang. My dad answered it, and a moment later, he returned with Anita, looking visibly distressed. She questioned why I hadn't answered her calls, expressing the need to talk. She noted that I had moved all my stuff out of the house and assumed the message left on my desktop would provide the necessary information. I responded, expressing my fear that it was her, and suggesting that we go somewhere to talk. I firmly stated that I was no longer her sweetheart and had nothing to discuss. Divorce proceedings had already begun, and anything that needed to be conveyed could go through our lawyers. I explained that what I witnessed in Denver had destroyed any feelings I had for her and requested her to leave so I could finish my dinner. She pleaded, and I reiterated that there was nothing to talk about without addressing the infidelity. I mentioned having pictures and that I planned to confront her lover, Sam, the following day. She tearfully insisted on talking. I responded, suggesting that she leave, as my dinner was getting cold. I proposed that she write me a letter, articulating how she could rationalize breaking her wedding vows. I assumed that, as a smart lawyer, she could explain how it was all my fault and that she could still love and respect me very much. With a sob, she turned away. Before reaching the door, she turned back and pleaded again. I said goodbye, and after she left, still crying, my parents remained stunned. My mom commented on the harshness of my response. I retorted, sharing the harsh reality of her actions and my inability to trust her again. I questioned whether she wanted me to give her grandchildren from a woman like that. My dad suggested that with time, my perspective might change. I replied, expressing doubt, and suggesting we talk about something else so I could digest my food.
That Monday morning when I left home, I was feeling sorry for myself having to leave Jack. But I thought how wonderful it would be when I got back, and we could start our family. We'd waited this long to make sure we were set financially and career-wise to begin being parents. Now everything was almost in place. The journey to Denver was uneventful. I sat next to Sam Harris, our chief negotiator, and we briefly discussed the upcoming negotiations and our families. Sam, who had been married for 20 years with 2 high school-age children, knew that I planned to quit work upon pregnancy, and he expressed that he would miss me. Sam and I, a negotiating team since before my marriage, had a comfortable rapport. The other 2 team members conversed behind us. Upon reaching the Denver hotel, we checked into our rooms, with Sam and I opting for adjoining rooms as usual. Originally intended for late-night strategy sessions, this arrangement evolved about 10 years ago when our relationship took a physical turn. We convinced ourselves that it was a stress relief mechanism after challenging negotiations, and at the time, we considered it not cheating on his wife if it contributed to our professional collaboration. After Jack and I got married, I refrained for a couple of years due to guilt. However, during an especially demanding negotiation, Sam proposed resuming our arrangement to relieve stress, and I reluctantly agreed. It became a habit again, with the thrill of secrecy boosting my libido at home, benefiting Jack and lessening my guilt. On the first night of this trip, we didn't meet as I felt tired after dinner. However, after the initial day of negotiations, I agreed to meet him the following night. The next morning, upon opening my laptop, I was shocked by what I saw on the screen. Sam, sitting next to me, quickly closed the lid, and we took the laptop to the hallway. He was furious, demanding to know what kind of content I had on my desktop. I responded that I didn't know and explained that it wasn't there the last time I used it. Still in shock, I suggested checking it again. Upon reopening it, we both looked at the picture, and Sam exclaimed that it was me. I questioned how it could be me, but he insisted, adding that it was probably him under me, although my face couldn't be seen. I asked if he had left the laptop unattended at any point the previous day. He denied it, saying that it was with him during the trip and in his suite while he was in mine. I wondered if anyone could have accessed my room with a camera, but he didn't think so, stating that the door was closed and he assumed it was locked. I advised him to get back to the hotel and check if anyone had been given access to his room the previous night. I assured him that I would handle things on my end and asked him to reach Jack to find out where he was last night. He expressed doubt, saying it couldn't have been Jack as he spoke with him at his folks' place. I asked if he had called Jack on his parents' phone, to which he replied that Jack had asked him to call on his cell phone. Worried about the situation, I mentioned that I didn't like the sound of it, as Jack could have been anywhere during their conversation. I instructed him to call me on my cell if he found out anything, and urged him to do whatever he could to manage the fallout from this. I told him to take a cab back to the hotel and said goodbye. Feeling anxious, I considered the possibility that Jack had taken the picture and placed it on my laptop. It seemed like a message that our marriage was over. I needed to return to the hotel to gather information. The receptionist arranged a cab, and 15 minutes later I was back, checking the front desk to see if anyone accessed my suite. The clerk confirmed that a Mr. Jack Fillmore received a card at 9:45 the previous evening, returned half an hour later. At that moment, I knew my marriage was likely over. The man I loved more than anything had disappeared. Despite the heartbreak, I felt compelled to fight for him. Entering my suite, I immediately tried to reach him on his cell and at work. No answer on his cell, it had been turned off. Leaving an important voice message, he called me back soon. His work secretary informed me he was on a business trip to California, expected back tomorrow. That was it. He had gone to California and stopped on his way back to surprise me. I guess we were both surprised. Calling his folks, they hadn't seen him for several days. I asked them to have him call me. No answer at home, but I left a message there too. Alone in the suite, I cried, realizing I had no way to talk to him unless I went home. So I picked up the phone, made reservations for the next flight to St. Louis, and after packing, I informed Sam of the situation. He was quiet before speaking. Sam mentioned that it seemed we were both facing divorce or worse. He pointed out the company's policy against managerial employees fraternizing, highlighting the potential risk of both of us being fired, which would not look good on our records. He expressed concern about losing Jack and acknowledged that losing his family would be bad too. He advised me to get back to St. Louis and find Jack, urging me to see if he would listen to reason. He informed me that he had made reservations for a flight leaving at noon, scheduled to be back by 4:30. For his sake, he emphasized the importance of finding Jack and talking to him. Sam mentioned that he would let me know how it goes, and explained that he had to stay there until negotiations were finished. He assured me that he would be waiting to hear from me. We said our goodbyes. Picking up my bag and laptop, I hurried down to the lobby, checked out, and took the hotel limo to the airport. Praying all the way back to St. Louis, I hoped to get Jack to talk to me. I had to explain it was just closeness and did not affect him at all. I had to stake everything on the hope that he could be unemotional about my infidelity and accept it for what it was. Nothing but meaningless closeness. Arriving back home, nothing seemed out of place at first. However, entering our bedroom and finding all his belongings gone made me realize he knew and had left me. I had to find him. After many fruitless phone calls, I decided to go to his folks' house to see if he was there or if they had an idea where he was. He was at his folks', and the reception I received from him made me nauseous in its unfeeling brutality. He informed me he was in the process of filing for divorce, had no desire to talk, and nothing I could say would change his mind. After sarcastically suggesting I write a long letter explaining my position, I left and sat in my car, crying. The family we had planned would never happen. Growing old together and enjoying grandchildren together felt like an unattainable dream. From a selfish viewpoint, what grieved me even more was the thought that by the time I found another husband, I might be too old to conceive.
Eventually, I started the car and returned to our vacant house. Following a restless night haunted by visions of Anita and Sam together, I rose early and descended to my folks' home, brewing coffee. Retrieving my laptop and camera, I proceeded to download the camera pictures into the computer, aiming to identify Sam. Examining the pictures, Sam's face remained unclear. However, I noticed something on his right arm reaching towards Anita's chest. Upon closer inspection, I identified a tattoo, a heart with the word Marie on it. Sam's wife was Marie. That's all I needed. I returned upstairs, showered, and prepared for work. When I came back down, my mother was up, preparing breakfast. Later at work, I burned a couple of CDs with the pictures I had taken and a blow-up of Sam's tattoo. I printed several sets and organized them in a folder before walking to our human resources department. I requested to see the manager, Phil, whom I knew from golf outings. Placing a set of pictures in front of him, I explained that the images might appear inappropriate, but they depicted my wife and Sam Harris. The date and time on them confirmed they were taken Tuesday evening in Sam's hotel suite in Denver during a company negotiation trip. Phil seemed visibly shocked and inquired about what he could do. I responded, suggesting that he could terminate both of them for cause under the anti-fraternization clause in their contract with the company. I pointed out that this clause had never been enforced before and questioned whether he was sure about pursuing this course of action. I mentioned that it would bring the affair out in the open and assumed that he was considering divorcing Anita over the matter. I informed him that I already had my lawyer drawing up the papers, but if he chose not to pursue it, I would bring suit against the company. Phil agreed, stating that he would take the matter to the legal department and get the ball rolling. He then prompted me to continue with the next point of discussion. I went in to see my boss, Evan, to inform him about the situation. He was appropriately horrified at what I had to tell him about my wife and Sam Harris when I requested the rest of the week off as vacation time, and he readily agreed. In parting, he congratulated me on a job well done. During my trip to California, the customer praised the quick resolution of their problem and requested if I would consider taking over the California territory, given the current field engineer's retirement due to ill health. I mentioned that I'd consider it and provide an answer upon my return to work the following week. On my way out of Evan's office, Kathy, his secretary, informed me that my wife had been looking for me and would return later. I instructed Kathy not to let my wife see me under any circumstances and expressed that there was a significant problem as we were getting divorced and she and Sam Harris were involved. I anticipated the news spreading throughout the plant by noon, considering Kathy's inclination for gossip. Returning to my desk, I called Marie Harris, Sam's wife, whom I knew from company picnics. I was aware that my revelations about our spouses could be challenging for her. I contacted Marie and explained the situation, expressing the need to talk as soon as possible. She agreed to meet and provided her address, and I agreed to visit her in 15 minutes. Upon arriving at the Harrises, I felt a sense of dread about disclosing the situation to Marie and her family. However, I believed Sam should face consequences and Anita should not bear the entire fallout. Marie greeted me, offering coffee, which I accepted. I decided to get straight to the point. I disclosed the affair between Sam and Anita, my pursuit of a divorce from Anita, and my decision to have them both fired from their jobs. I mentioned that the information would soon become public knowledge and offered to show her photos as evidence. Observing her face, I was surprised at the lack of a significant reaction. Marie shared that she had suspected Sam's infidelity during company trips for years, but hoped it wasn't true. She acknowledged Sam's previous role as a loving husband and father. Marie expressed regret for both my marriage and her own situation. She considered the possibility of Sam being fired and the challenges he might face finding another well-paying job. She concluded by offering me a set of photographs if I wanted them. Marie expressed gratitude for sharing the photographs, stating that she would leave them for her to look at later when she could gather the strength. I apologized, explaining that I couldn't let the situation go, especially considering Anita and I were on the verge of starting a family. I emphasized the importance of trust and respect in a relationship, qualities I believe the mother of our children should possess. She acknowledged my decision and thanked me for informing her directly, expressing understanding about not wanting to hear it from other sources first. Marie extended her sympathy for my situation with Anita, anticipating her devastation and remorse when she found out about the affair. She wished it were a one-time incident, finding it easier to forgive, but believed it had been ongoing for years, making it harder to accept now that it was out in the open. Marie emphasized her pride and the need to hold her head up. I assured her that if there was anything I needed, I would let her know before leaving and heading back to my parents' house. Update. It's been 6 months since I initiated divorce proceedings. I received my copy of the agreement dissolving my marriage to Anita this morning. I never talked with her or saw her again after the time she came to my parents' house. My lawyer handled it all. I gave her the heavily mortgaged house with the highly financed furniture and furnishings to release all claims on me. I also had my name taken off the mortgage. She assumed full responsibility for making the payments. Of course, without a job, she had to put it up for sale and lost her shirt on the deal. She attempted to contest the divorce, but I threatened to change the reason for divorce to infidelity and release the pictures of her and Sam to the internet if she didn't sign the papers in 48 hours. She signed them within the required time, and that is why I'm a free man today. I guess she decided that she didn't want me that bad. Anyway, she was terminated from her job, but she's a smart lawyer and negotiator, so she found another one within a month, not making as much or with the benefits. Seniority brought her in her old job, but I hear she's getting by and dating again. Lots of luck to the boyfriend if she lands him. I wonder if she's told him about our divorce and the reason. Maybe I should enlighten him. Marie divorced Sam, and took him to the cleaners financially. He found another job too, after he was terminated, but he's struggling to make the alimony and child support payments with his new salary. I'm now living in Santa Maria, California, a quiet place near the coast, about halfway between the Bay Area and LA. This positions me pretty well to cover both southern and northern parts of the state. I moved here about 4 months back and have an apartment in a complex with other singles and young couples, most trying to save money for a down payment on a house. Housing costs are high out here, and it takes big bucks to buy into the market. I have a steady girlfriend who lives in the same complex. She's divorced, like me, but we're comfortable together, and I think we'll see how it goes in the future with me traveling so much. I really need to trust the one I marry, but I need to make a move before too long if we want to start a family. Biological clocks keep on ticking.